Two. Hello, check. Are you there? Are you there, Chad? Are you with me? Are you bloody well with me? Oi! Oi! Are you bloody well with me, innit? You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Right then, from the river to the sea, gov, in it.
Praxid, thank you for the 20 months. Couldn't agree more with that. Couldn't agree more. I got to fire this up. This is really much needed right now. Chin chin, everybody. This is for you, Marty, if you're there. This is for you, buddy. I'm hoping this is the thing that, like, really brings me back to feeling normal. I think I might almost be there. Have you tried the peach or paradise mustard? I've tried the peach. I'm not crazy overall about peach as like a flavor. Except maybe those little fuzzy peach sour things. I had the energy drink was fine, but I didn't love it. Green apple monster zero here. We don't have those here. What the fuck? I believe I have had the paradise one. I'm hoping this is the thing that makes me feel normal. As I was mentioning, it was the unrigged launch party thing yesterday at Grumpy's here in Montreal. And I definitely, I mean, it wasn't that outrageous. I was home by 11:30, midnight or so. It's not like it was that crazy. I didn't go that crazy. I'm not really capable of doing, like, the idea of staying out till 2 or 3 now, thinking about that, I think I would just die. I think I would die if I tried to do that. I was home by midnight, but it was definitely, like, it was a lot. I think it was because Chris Curtis was there of the Rover. He goes pretty hard. And I wanted to keep up, so I didn't seem like a nerd. I wanted to try and keep up. So Chris Curtis from the Rover wouldn't think that I was a nerd. And I definitely, you know those moments when you go out and you think, should I go home now or should I stay for just one more drink or whatever? And I definitely think making that choice yesterday cost me. It cost me something. I hadn't eaten all day also. It's not like I drank all that much, but I hadn't eaten all day. So I was a little tipsy. So I got home at like midnight. When I got home, I made a cheeseburger because I hadn't eaten all day. I came back at like midnight and made a cheeseburger, and it was maybe the best cheeseburger I've ever eaten. Like, I've had a lot of burgers in my life. I mean, look at me. Look at me. Chat, you know that I love a nice burger, right? I've had many good burgers in my life, but I swear this was like maybe the best cheeseburger I've ever had. It was so fantastic. But I was up at 7:15 to help bring my kid to school, and it was rough. It was rough getting up. It's not like I'm that hungover, like I feel sick or anything, but just tired. Just really, really tired. So after I dropped him off, I tried to nap for a little bit. I had one of those like weird, unsatisfying things where it's like you kind of I was like, did I sleep? Did I not? I don't know. I may have slept for a few minutes, but I don't know. Yeah, I did. Effusive stoic. I did not hydrate at all. I did not hydrate during, before, or after. I really just didn't take the basic steps to soften the landing a little bit. So I was just, I got up at 7:15 and I brought my kid to school. He's going on like a field trip today to the theater. He's excited for that. But yeah, after it's taken me a while to recover. I did start to get up and going about 11. I had a really good ramen, and that helped a lot. I had a Coke and a really spicy ramen with like cheese in it and dumplings and some mushrooms in there. That was nice. That definitely restored me to some level of like basic humanity. Now I'm hoping this White Monster Zero pushes me over the top. But I'm still standing. I always loved cheese and crackers when I was hungover. That sounds nice. The spicy broth and noodles and all this good stuff in there definitely really like helped me a lot. We're going to see how the stream goes today. We will see how it goes. We will see how it goes. Box mac and cheese with half a can chili. Oh, that sounds good. That sounds fantastic. When he reads. Hell yeah. Did you see Blinken react to Biden calling Xi a dictator? I did see that. Yeah, we can try to take a look at that today. It was that was very funny. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, right? About how Biden like has this propensity, almost as much as Trump, to like say true things in like a gaffe. A rare sympathetic moment for Anthony Blinken. That's right. He's just like, oh, Jesus Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. Eating a burger like Hasselhoff. That's what I did last night. And you know what? It was great. I do a lot of things like David Hasselhoff. I love how that reporter gave 2 dagger questions right as Biden was walking up. Blinken thought he was in the clear. Yeah, it's keep walking, sir. Just keep walking, and we're good to go. But no, it's interesting how Biden he'll say these like true things, like whether it's about Israel. You know, that's that classic clip of him that we've watched often talking about Israel in the 80s. And as well, just describing exactly who the United States views as dictators. And he said it right in that clip. He's the leader of a country has a different system of government than we do. That's it. If you're the president, if you have some kind of like liberal style democracy, some kind of parliamentary democracy, if you have any other kind of government, dictator. That's how it works. We're really seeing how democratic the U.S. is right now. And their shining beacon on the hill of democracy. As like anti-war Jewish protesters are being having the shit beat out of them by police, by jackbooted thugs, protecting the liberal politicians who are co-signing a genocidal campaign. They sent jackbooted thugs to beat up Jewish protesters. That's how democratic the United States is. Yeah, I mean, Justin Potter tweeted about this. We've seen Israeli police beating Jews mercilessly. We've seen New York and Oakland police dragging Jews to arrest. We've seen Columbia U ban a Jewish student group, and Capitol Police manhandling pro-ceasefire Jews. That's the democratic United States of America, and how much they care about and support Jewish people. Hello, Regime Pilled. How's it going? Justin Potter is supposed to be coming on the show today. I did verify a couple days ago on Monday, but haven't really talked to him since then. I did shoot him a message a few minutes ago, so we'll see if that works out. I really enjoyed the last time he came on the show, and I'm sure he's going to have a lot to say. So we'll see if he can still come on. That'd be fantastic. If not, I'll work out another time for that. Oh, I'm still just trying to work on it. I think this will help too. I got my Monster Energy and my apple. The ramen was really good. Can someone give me a recap? You talking about like the guest? Justin Potter. He is the author of Siegebreakers, a 2019 novel where Palestinians in Gaza win a war of liberation. He also has a really great Substack, which I really, really recommend people check out. Called the Anti-Empire Project, which is also in podcast form. Really, really respect and admire the work that he does. Did you see of course we saw the leader of the free world made a trip to San Francisco. He's leading Biden around by the elbow so he doesn't get lost. It's funny because like I do want to talk about how there does seem to be a shift in the language and the hostility towards China, and there seems to be I don't really know what to make of it, but it seems to be there's this big shift in diplomatic relationship right now between the US and China, and even between China and the US. You saw there's polling within China where all of a sudden the anti-US sentiment has gone down a lot. So there seems to be some effort being made there and in America at the moment to kind of heal that relationship. It's kind of interesting. And it's funny because with that whole clip with Biden and President Xi, that whole meeting, something happened that I thought was one of the more humanizing moments for Biden that I've seen in a while, considering his foreign policy has been such a disaster when it comes to China or when it comes to anywhere else. But there was this really nice moment where Biden was like, he showed President Xi a picture on his phone, and he was like, "Do you recognize this young man?" And it was a picture of President Xi in San Francisco like 30 years ago or something. And they had a little chuckle together. I thought it was a really nice kind of moment, actually. And then like a day later, Biden's like, "He's a dictator, Jack." But it seems like China still is promoting the idea that the meeting was really valuable. So we'll see. I don't know. It's like, I don't know what to make of that. Yeah, we need them. They don't need us. I mean, they do in a way. I mean, and I think China doesn't want to they don't want to have World War III. Like, they don't want Taiwan to turn into another Ukraine situation. Like, they've always been about trying to promote peace and trying to promote diplomacy. Yeah, someone looked into the NATO stockpile and said, "Oh boy, yeah, oh no, we got to do something here. This is maybe not so good. Maybe we shouldn't have a 3-front war right now in Ukraine and the Middle East and China. Maybe that's not such a good idea. I don't know." So it's interesting. I saw a really funny quote from like a Chinese social media user as well. Like in the New York Times had this piece like about this kind of changing polling and the like easing down of this kind of anti-American sentiment. And there's this really funny pull quote from this Chinese social media user that was like, "So going forward, are we supposed to hate America or aren't we?" Like they're like, what's the direction here? Where are we supposed to be going with this? Not to agree with our buddy Vivek, but it's amazing to me that the U.S. was so gung-ho to go after Russia and drive them into the arms of China. Well, I mean, it's not Vivek, Sean. I mean, that's something that anyone has acknowledged over the last couple of years. The way that, like, these two great powers had been separated and despised each other, you know, and through their own belligerence, America pushed them back together into this partnership. U.S. has to play nice at least until they finish building the semiconductor factories. Yeah, that's part of it. And that's the whole thing, is that, like, who knows what the next administration is going to be. China's completely taken over the infrastructure gaps the U.S. completely forgot about. Yeah, I mean, the U.S. should be inviting China into the U.S. and Canada, for that matter, to build infrastructure. It's not like we can do it here. Yeah, it's also a matter of playing nice until, like, there's this kind of, like, ongoing economic decoupling, which maybe is possible and maybe is not possible. Like, we don't even know if that is possible, really, for the West to economically decouple from China. I know there's efforts being made, but, like, people have to understand that having a direct confrontation with them is going to completely destroy the global supply chain and our entire way of life. So there must be at least some awareness of that somewhere in these power centers. Slowly becoming a human being again here. Hang over here, chug the first monster, then sip the second. I only got one. I only got one to work with. Cue the other Biden clip of her saying Iran, China, and Russia will work together. Well, that's the kind of interesting thing about this, like, this sudden shift. It really seems to be out of nowhere. Like, we've been covering this for, like, over the course of the last year and over the course of the last 3 years. The increasing hostility, the increasing tensions, all the spy balloon shit. Like, that was like, what was that, 6 months ago? I actually don't remember. It was something like that, though. Like, that was not long ago. the constant fear mongering, the Olympics, right? All the accusations of the human rights violations, Hong Kong, COVID. You know, this is all very recent. So this shift, this diplomatic shift seems really abrupt. You know, this Gavin Newsom guy, I know he's basically an 80s Republican, but like, I do a little bit love to see this though. I would love one of those jerseys. I would love a President Xi Jinping
you can count on me,
Warriors
good old
jersey.
Rob, to talk you through all this.
King of Barbies, thanks for the 5 months. The spy balloon shit could have happened 10 minutes ago or 10 years ago. I couldn't tell the difference. Yeah, it's all just one big blob to me now. Who knows? Didn't you know their economy is on the verge of collapse? I think there's truth to the idea that their economy is struggling a bit. Part of that is their own decisions to like disentangle the housing market from this financialization aspect. I do think there is something to that though, that their economy has stalled. Maybe I don't think of these like doomsday YouTubers like it's on the verge, 8 days away from collapse, anything like that. I do think there is something to the idea that their economy has stalled, and that's possibly why they're also making the effort right now. To try and repair that relationship so they can both mutually benefit. That's what all their diplomacy is about, right? Mutual benefit. It's the world economy in general. It's not a China problem in particular. I do think there is something about definancializing their housing markets, which is a good thing to do. Like, I'm not saying that's not, like, I don't think that's a bad thing to do. I think it's a good thing to do, but it's like, it's trying to like decommodify these like markets that are huge financial sectors, you know? It's not good for the economy if that's how you measure these things.
This is some guy, Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
Well, hello. Well, hello. It's Left Flank Vets. And you know what? We got an interview coming up right now. Hello, Left Flank Vets. You came here just in time. We got an interview coming up. Left Flank Vets, it's me, Rob. Hello. Please smash the follow button. I got to get my game face on now because I wasn't sure if this interview is happening, and I just found that it's happening. So we're going. We're doing it live. Sitting down with none other than President Xi Jinping of China. Very exciting. It's a very exciting day here. It's a big get. It's a huge get, really. None other than President Xi Jinping. Wow. We have two guests coming on right now. We've got Justin Poder and John Elmer. Coming on the show right now, John Elmer of the Electronic Intifada website. She is a 48-month subscriber. That's right. He's got one of the elite badges that people don't even know about. You don't even know about some of these badges. I'm gonna close this. I got Zoom there. Okay, good. I'm still so tired. Let's see if I can pull this off. Let's see. Let's see if I can do this. I'm sure it's going to be fine. Hello, Justin.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I sound okay?
Yeah, you sound fine. How's it going?
Okay. Let me rename myself just,
Sure.
you know, people are very touchy about including your institution in your bio.
Yeah, of course.
How are you?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
We just launched this like new sort of media project called
Yes, I saw.
Unrigged.
It's a really good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it seems cool. And there was the launch party thing last night, so I'm maybe a step slower than usual because we had the whole launch thing.
It was a good party
last night. It was nice. Yeah, it was fun.
Oh, good.
We
Great.
had fun. So, are we waiting for still John Elmer as well?
Yeah, he just wrote me to say he got the DM. I
Okay.
sent him your Zoom link, so yeah, he should be in here any second.
Great.
Are you live already?
Yeah, we're live right now. Yeah.
Oh, hi everybody.
Yeah.
Your
Maybe
legions
maybe I could have made that
viewers.
clear.
Yeah, man, that's cool. Here's John. So, John, can you hear us?
Can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, John.
guys.
How's it going? Nice to
Hey,
meet
Rob.
you.
Thanks for having me.
This is my pleasure. Thanks for joining the show.
Happy to be here.
Great.
So, what are we doing, Rob? How do we do this today?
I don't know. It's a great question. I don't know.
What is you have the life of a streamer? It's just it's such a romantic idea for us. We're just like that's what it's so youthful and like we don't really understand what it is, but
I barely understand it myself.
Yeah, you're a little old for this streaming game yourself.
Fucking tell me about it. I know.
You're a geriatric.
Is this lighting
streamer.
okay?
Yeah, well, the thing is, my whole community,
John,
they're
you're
all
already live. They're already watching us.
Oh, guys, is everyone out there? Is my lighting
Yeah.
okay?
the lighting
We're
is
not in like a
what
back
it's
room
wonderful.
or anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Live TV. Sorry, guys.
Rob, I can just start talking. Should we just start talking?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts right now, Justin? I mean, I've been following your tweets about the ongoing the brutal spasm of violence that we've been seeing over the last now 5-6 weeks. You said something that really spoke to me a couple weeks ago when this was kind of really kicking off, just talking about the depravity of this moment and just this relentless bombing campaign on this captive population in Gaza, and just how it's really one of the more depraved things. We've been around a little bit. We lived through Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Syria. We've seen our empire responsible for a lot of depravity, but this does feel like a uniquely horrifying moment, I think, and it's just been really something else to take it in. So how are you feeling right now?
Well, yeah, right now, for the past couple of days, we've been watching Israel unfold this just like military campaign against a hospital.
Yeah.
And they're bulldozing parts of it. They're destroying floors of the hospital. They're destroying individual buildings of the campus. They're taking away bodies from the courtyard. They're setting up snipers to kill people in the courtyard, sniping at people who are trying to leave. Then they're going in and planting their flags on different parts of the hospital as if they had, as if it was some kind of hilltop in World War II where they were fighting their way through machine gun nests and, bayonet charges and stuff. And then they're we're planting our flag at the end. And I don't really know what like it's like a parallel universe where they're describing like we conquered this and we've conquered that, and like then they show obviously doctored footage or like obviously faked videos and photos where they're like, we have medical supplies, and then it's like an obviously empty box that they're tossing back and forth. And then
the big English language labels, just medical supplies on these boxes.
gigantic
It's just
English
absurd.
language labels. And then they're like, we look at how depraved they are. They put missiles under beds and in baby carriages and stuff. And it's like, it's this parallel universe of like celebrating the conquest of a hospital, celebrating victory over children. And in the meantime, you look at like the Hamas armed wing and the footage that they're putting out of like blowing up tanks and jeeps, and they're putting out reports of like what military equipment they're destroying. And I don't understand what Israel is doing anymore, where they're like they're not it's almost like they're allowing their military equipment to be dismantled so that they can publicly celebrate the military victory over a hospital. And so I'm having the past few days have been hard for me to wrap my head around. I think of myself as a pretty smart guy. I think of myself as like, and one of the things that I do is like that I think of myself as like having this personal brand, which is I don't ever underestimate the other side. So I assume that they're smart. I never assume that they're dumb. I try to figure out what they might be doing and why they might be doing what they're doing. And I can't quite figure it out. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, how about you, John?
Yeah, I can't believe it. I mean, they're clearly attacking in a structural manner the hospitals of Gaza. I mean, they attacked a pediatric hospital and then showed us footage of diapers. It's really unbelievable.
Yeah, a very sinister calendar as well.
Yeah, but their forgeries and fake explanations are just embarrassing. It's really unbelievable. Like a shoelace on the ground is proof that their captives are held in that hospital. But where are the captives now? They act as if there's no way they could have ever found the people. So their own logic that doesn't make sense. The internal logic that they're even offering doesn't make sense. But what we're seeing is a concerted structural attack on hospitals. That has been the goal. They moved in from the north, they moved down the Mediterranean coast, and now they're raiding the hospitals and shutting them down one by one. I mean, we've been following it since the beginning, and we do these updates, and every couple of days we update. Now 16 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are out. Now 18 of their 36. They're up to 24 out of the 36, and there's only one hospital left in the north. They don't have any power, food, water. There's no medical supplies at all. People, like Justin's saying, he's trying to find words for it. People there who've lived through these, half dozen wars in their lives, they can't put words to it either. It's even the most cynical among us didn't think that Shifa would be the first target in the Gaza Strip. I mean, actually, the first target was the pediatric hospital. Just the level and depth of depravity, and then on the other hand, not being able to show any kind of military success. So it's not like they're saying, we're plunging through this territory, rooting out Hamas, and the hospitals are accidentally or like happenstance to be on the road to the place where we're going to defeat our enemy. They're actually saying that the enemy is the hospital, and the media is backing this in a way that even cynical media assessors. It's unbelievable that the BBC went yesterday and agreed to take a tour of Shifa Hospital, where they agreed not to talk to patients or doctors. Like, wouldn't those be the primary sources that you would want to have for that story? And then if you were denied those sources, would you not reject on principle that assignment? But no, the BBC went in. You said, we don't need to talk to the doctors, who obviously could tell you everything you need to know about this war because they're seeing it. And the patients at Shifa have been at Shifa for the last 5 weeks. They've watched everything. They would be the best sources in the Gaza Strip for what's happening. And the BBC is fine with passing that off. CNN's Nick Robertson went on an even worse tour, where he was actually reminding the IDF spokesperson what he's supposed to be saying in these fraudulent interviews. And again, like, Justin and I have talked about it, because I said to Justin, like, if I'm ever captured and I find out that you took pictures with Nick Robertson of the hole that I'm apparently down in, and then just said, like, there's not much I can do about that, that I would be very upset about that. I can't believe that they're not going after their people. The whole premise of this genocide is that they're trying to get their people back. But it's clear that that's not at all their interest. The Qassam brigades have offered since the beginning realistic and very knowable exchanges of prisoners that could have gotten dozens of their people back. I think that there's a core of people that were captured in southern Israel on October 7th that probably aren't coming back anytime soon. That's the generals of the Southern Command, the commanders of the more than a dozen outposts that were overrun. Those prisoners are valuable in an exchange. We saw, a decade ago, one single tank gunner got 1,000 Palestinians out of prison, including Yahya Sinwar, who's now the head of Hamas in Gaza. The founder of Hamas, Ahmed Yassin, was freed in a prisoner exchange. There's going to be a significant prisoner exchange that comes out of this. But there's a whole stage, a number of stages before that could be executed already. They could trade women and children for the women and children in Israeli prison. There's more than 250 of them. The Qassam brigades have said we'll do that. The Qassam brigades are trying to hand over the foreigners that were captured, the migrant workers that, there was people captured that the Qassam brigade said, like, we didn't have an opportunity to check out who they were. But within, 36 or 48 hours of the event happening, the Qassam brigades were willing to turn over the people that had nothing to do with this. They have no interest in the civilians that were captured. And all Israel has to do is, like, stop the bombing for a few hours so that the Red Cross can come and pick up those people who are dying. Every day, more people are dying because, of course, your prisoners are getting killed as well, because everyone in Gaza is getting killed. And the army has asked people to move out of Gaza City. But if the prisoners are in Gaza City, they're not moving out of Gaza City. So they've made the most dangerous possible environment for their own people, which I find, like, the brutality and depravity is, I don't want to say I expected it, but the sort of cowardly bombing from the air, like, that stuff from Israel, I'm used to a little bit, but yeah, the scale is beyond all that. But I'm shocked that there's not even a pretense that they're trying to get their people home.
Yeah, there are a few assumptions that we made, I think, over the decades of following this, Rob, that, like, we've been proven wrong about. So, like, one of them is that we've always believed, and, like, a lot of guerrilla warfare is conceived on the idea that the imperialists value their own lives much more than they value the colonized people's lives. So they're willing to, kill a lot of people, but they're not willing to take a lot of casualties. And this seems to be true still, but it's not like we would, I think the assumption that presumably Qassam or Hamas's armed wing made when they said, we're going to capture these people and Israel will be willing to trade thousands of our people for hundreds of Israelis because they value Israelis more than they value Palestinians by some multiple. But like the way that it looks, going back to October 7th as well, the way that they murdered, indiscriminately opening fire on houses in Kibbutz Be'eri, which, we have Israeli testimony for.
Yeah.
Indiscriminately firing on Israelis running away.
And that was reported in Israeli state media as well, for people that think that's some kind of
Israeli
propaganda.
Eyewitnesses, Israeli troops that did the shooting, Israeli video of the shooting, all of these things. This is surprising. This is surprising to me, and also the way that it looks like they're methodically murdering the hostages. It looks like no bombing pause, and the way that they're bombing, the way that they bomb, in Jabalia camp and elsewhere with these 1,000-kilogram bombs, there's no way that nobody who wants to save hostages that could be anywhere would behave like that. So it's are they trying to kill the hostages so that they don't have to make an exchange? Is that we know that from a military doctrine, that they have that doctrine, the Hannibal doctrine, where they say we will kill directive. Yeah, we'll kill the hostage and the people trying to take the hostage. But does that apply now to hostages that are already captured?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you saw when those settler grandmas were released a week or two ago, you could tell there was kind of a real panicked response to the things that they were saying in the media, saying, it wasn't nice to be kidnapped, but when we were there, we were treated with kindness and respect, and we were given medicine and food, and you can tell from the perspective of the Zionist regime, hostages are a lot more valuable no longer alive and not saying things like that than people being released and saying those kinds of things to the media.
And you've been talking about our Twitter, and I really respect what you've been doing on Twitter, and I haven't read replies to you, but
I try to avoid it myself. Yeah.
If you're on Twitter for any length of time, tweeting anything that could be construed as pro-Palestine, for the past month and a half, the main thing people say is well, Hamas should free the hostages if they don't want thousands of children to die. Hamas should free the hostages. But it's Israel has literally not allowed the freeing of the hostages.
Yeah, I mean, it was really strange at that pro-Israel rally that happened the other day, seeing people say to Van Jones, saying I support peace, I don't think we should bomb anyone, and people saying no, ceasefire, chanting it. And that is really strange to say, the bombing will stop when the hostages are released. Yeah. There's a real tension between these two ideas. We're going to continue this indiscriminate carpet bombing campaign on the exact place where we know these hostages are being kept.
Yeah.
And that's only going to stop when they're released. That's not, these two things are kind of mutually exclusive, aren't they?
Yeah, the revenge mission is taking priority over their own people, right? They were hit so hard on October 7th. Their military was collapsed so thoroughly that they have this just pure revenge that doesn't include their own people. And it didn't, as Justin said, on October 7th. We have tons of evidence now from many different sources and layered sources, from the tank commanders to the people that had the shells fired at them, that they lost their mind on that day as well, and were fired, using standoff fire, firing from a distance at their own people instead of going in and fighting. Like, we know that a lot of those kibbutz on that day were left abandoned for 8, 12, and more hours. And in
There's
some of
group
the
chats.
cases,
John,
people,
did you
yeah,
guys
people
see
were
the group
freed
chat?
from group chats because they WhatsApped their friends in Tel Aviv and said, I'm still in my safe house and the army hasn't showed up. And it's like the morning of the next day, and civilians are getting in their car and driving down to the bases to free their people. But they were using helicopter gunships to shoot people in cars, like as if they didn't have intelligence enough to know that the only cars that came across the border were those white pickups full of Qassam fighters.
Right.
But then when they're returning back, they're bombing like little Peugeot cars and all of that stuff that happened outside of the rave. A lot of that is just so clearly airstrikes that are hitting those cars. So they didn't care about their people on that day. And now they're not interested in a prisoner exchange that could happen at any moment. If Israel were to decide, I know it's crazy to even talk about, but if Israel were to say, were to take a different tact and say, like, we're going to have a prisoner exchange, we're going to make the difficult sacrifice to bring our people home, the war could end today. Qassam would turn everybody over, just release people from prison, thousands of Palestinians that Israel thought, effectively that they had killed by putting them in jail forever. Those people could be returned to their families, which impacts every family in the West Bank and Gaza. So it's something that Palestinians are deeply involved in. And because of the war has got so crazy, we almost haven't really talked about that whole part of it, that there's a possibility for a prisoner exchange today. And there was 2 weeks ago, and there was a month ago.
Yeah.
And those communications through back channels to Qatar and to Egypt, those channels have been, from everything we know, have been extremely consistent on that question. And that's the record of Qassam before. Qassam held Gilad Shalit for almost 6 years, for 2,000 days. And when he got out, he was a bit skinnier, but he said he was treated well. He wasn't even interrogated or tortured, like the primary step that Israel uses when they take, the most logical first step is to release the women and children from prison. Those children were tortured before they were put in prison in Israel, often without even being charged. They're tortured before they're even told what the evidence is. So they don't even know how to talk their way around the torture because they don't even know what they're being tortured about. Those people could have been handed over right away, probably, I don't want to speculate, but probably for 100 of those captives, if not more. That Qassam is holding.
Well, I mean, Qassam said, I understand Hamas said we'll release non-military prisoners unconditionally.
Immediately.
Yeah, during any bombing pause. And the response from Israel has been to never have a bombing pause. Literally never have a bombing pause. Like
to attack people that do. So the other thing is that then they attack the people who do try to navigate that pause, right? So when Israel said there was or temporary pause,
said,
people
go
walk
south,
and then they massacre them.
Yeah. So
the Red Cross is watching that, saying, like, I'm not sure I want to do the handover of 100 people, which is a logistical effort, when the whole world's just watching you massacre people who are doing this. Aid workers, they don't care. Like, they bomb the Rafah crossing. They just, the Rafah crossing in the south, which is not like, it's just a passenger terminal. Israel bombed the road so that the passengers couldn't use the road from that terminal. And so when you're asking for the logistics of a prisoner exchange, you have to at least be able to ensure that you're not going to massacre the intermediaries. And Israel's not willing to do that.
And nobody is even, like, they've killed how many United Nations workers?
Yeah.
And every time they kill them, the United Nations is like, oh, these workers died. Isn't it sad?
And Israel's there at the UN being like, well, the UN is basically Hamas now. And like almost like saying, we are doing this intentionally and you deserve it and you're asking for it.
And the UN is like,
bizarre.
sorry. Yes, we did ask for it. We apologize. I mean,
insanity. Yeah.
these things like are being rewritten right now. Like international law is being rewritten, like standards of evidence are being rewritten, the laws of war are being rewritten, the Geneva Conventions are being rewritten, all to accommodate this genocide. Like we have to all change the way we speak, the way we think, the way we work. We have to watch our language, all so that we can make sure that Israel can continue this genocide. It's like, it's amazing to see, and it really feels, it really feels like we're being asked to accept a fairly radical transformation of our society to make this work for them.
I mean, you mentioned the conquering of the hospital, which has been so bizarre. But I think it's been really interesting following this over the last couple of weeks, because you had the bombing of the Al Ahli hospital, now whatever it was, 2 weeks ago, which, hundreds of people were killed. It had this big international outcry, and of course you had this then kind of really bizarre reaction where the kind of zone was totally flooded with different versions of the story, and Israel saying we did it, but Hamas was there, or we didn't do it, or it was Hamas, or it was
an unexploded rocket.
Yeah.
The first unexploded rocket we would have seen with that.
Yeah, and
but
then
frankly, they applied 6 at least different stories just to that one event, just to create chaos.
And since that
it totally
time,
worked, because ever since then, it's always been blasts at Gaza hospitals, mysterious blasts.
And it's been bizarre, though, because since that time, in which they ended up kind of taking the stance of, no, we would never dream of doing something like this or attacking this hospital, there's been this nonstop stream of very lazy, terrible propaganda to now suggest that all of these hospitals are legitimate targets. Like you had the comical phone conversation where the two guys are saying, yes, brother, let's go do terrorism by the hospital, and like all this kind of bullshit. You saw Netanyahu talking about the hospital, showing this is the sprawling complex underneath, using this like cartoon, like it's literally a cartoon, saying this is our evidence of this like G.I. Joe style base, like under this hospital. You had that incredibly terrible video of the nurse saying, I can't believe I'm doing this. Hamas has taken over the hospital. Just comically bad. Like, it's like, I watched it the other day and I couldn't believe how horrible it was. And then, so yeah, now they put everything into this suggestion that this hospital is not just like a location where Hamas operates out of, but it's the command center. Like, that's what they were saying. That's what U.S. intelligence was backing them up, right? This is the absolute command center. It's the in Al Shifa hospital. That's where it's all coming from. So then, like you said, they conquered the hospital. They raised the flag, and then they have this like video. It's like, look, we found some dusty AK-47s and an old laptop, and you see the kind of goalposts shifting, and so that's been really strange, and they're going after other hospitals now. And now as well, now they're saying, today I saw something break earlier today. Ehud Olmert tells me Hamas command center is in Khan Yunis, not Shifa hospital. Now it's in Khan Yunis, which is the southern part of Gaza, where they told everyone they needed to evacuate to. And now they're saying, oh, the actual command center is in the south.
Yeah, and Shifa's just a node now. They changed the language. It's a command node.
Oh, it's a node. Okay. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's just been so depraved and bizarre. And like, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but it's like, number one, are you surprised by like the effort level of this propaganda? Like, it seems like it's worse than it's ever been. The absolute unwillingness to even try, really, to create convincing kind of wag the dog style propaganda to justify what they're doing. It's all so comically bad. And we're meant to accept it as being real, and our people in our media class and our political class are meant to just say, "Yep, this is we back this fully." It's preposterous,
and they have, right?
Yeah,
like embarrassingly, history is not going to reflect well on this.
Well, so if you apply my algorithm of like they're not dumb, they're smart, there must be some reason. And I kind of think if you assume they're smart, then this is more about asserting their power to tell us whatever they want. And the worse the propaganda is that we're supposed to believe, the more we've accepted their power to define how we talk about this, right? So they point to diapers. Like, so I think of all this as like a very personal humiliation of me. Like, they're trying to humiliate me. They're trying to tell me, like, we can point to a diaper, we can point to a baby bottle and be like, this is a terrorist baby bottle, and you're gonna have to accept it because that's how much control we have over the way you talk about things. And if that makes you feel like you've lost your mind, you know, too bad. You know, like, and I don't know. I don't know what is going to be left. Like, you know, Israel is not behaving the way that you know, I said this like on October 9th or something, but like, they're not behaving like a state that wants to be there long term. That doesn't, it's just like, this is not the behavior of somebody who, like, you know, moves into a neighborhood and is like, okay, well, this is going to be my neighborhood and everybody better get used to me. It's more like you know, you move into this neighborhood and then you start murdering your neighbors, and like, there are screams heard from, you know, from down the street, and you come out and you say, does anybody have a problem with this? And it's like, this is not how you behave if you plan to live somewhere in a region long term. But like, so I don't know what they're thinking in terms of how long they're planning to be there. But like, I'm wondering what's going to be left of our societies. Like, what's going to be left of Canada after our entire political class and media and institutions have supported this. And like, you know, the thing that happened with the Toronto School Board, right? Like, the Toronto School Board has a partnership with some Israeli lobby group, and some school in Toronto, the students did a walkout and they said, Trudeau, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide, right?
Yeah.
So
Which has been at every single pro-Palestine protest.
Every single thing. So then the lobby organization, the Canadian CJA, I don't know what it stands for, CJA, made a false, like, libelous lie that the students were chanting Judah, you can't hide, which, you know, I don't even know, like, nobody would know what that means, least of all a bunch of high school students. But like, I gather that that's some kind of anti-Semitic thing. They were obviously saying Trudeau and not Judah, but they lied about these students, put them in danger, put targets on all of their backs. And you know, someone from TDSB, a anti-racist educator, Javier Davila, he was calling out that he was like, this is a lie, this is not true, this is not what the students were chanting. The school board suspended him, and they've suspended him before over Palestine stuff. So like, you know, I said the other day, like, every time Israel does a massacre in Gaza, the TDSB has to suspend poor Javier Davila. It's like a checklist. It's like, well, we better suspend Javier before he puts out some anti-racist resources, right? So, like, our society is being also asked to, like, we have to accept an institution that's willing to lie and endanger students, high school students, children, being a partner of the school board. And like, what else? Right? Like, what else? Like, they suspended, you know, they suspended this doctor for his tweets, you know, and they said it, like, that's an interesting one too. Like, they suspend this doctor. So here's how you do a suspension of a doctor. The doctor tweets, you know, please don't bomb hospitals, whatever it was he was tweeting, right? Then pro-Israel people threaten the doctor. They threaten the hospital, and the hospital president or CEO or whatever suspends the doctor for being threatened. So you're basically advertising, like, if you ever want to get rid of somebody, make a threat, and then we, the leadership of the institution will suspend the threatened person, not, try to protect the person who's threatened. So it's like, so the profession of medicine, is now being modified, right? So that we can facilitate the genocide better. The profession of journalism, we don't even have to talk about, like John was talking about the BBC accepting like the most, what it means to be a journalist. That's not this. This is not that. So like, how are we going to get anything done in the West after this? I don't know.
And Israel keeps doing this to children, right? Like you just said that story, Justin, like they're doing it to those children marching out of class, like as if those children aren't going to stay living in this world, growing up, knowing what you did, right? And that's the same in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
It's not what you're doing to people in Gaza, you're doing to children. They're all watching. More than half of them are children. It really does make it hard to imagine how you're going to live in that neighborhood. And I mean, they're doing it to their own children too. Like the way that Israel is approaching this war, it makes it really difficult to see how they're going to go back to how it was on October 6th, where people are going to be, keen to live in these nice, friendly kibbutz, fortified kibbutz right on the border with Gaza, which are critical for enclosing the Gaza Strip. I don't know. I saw yesterday at one of the funerals for one of the tank commanders that was killed in Gaza, and his brother was like, well, I was going to go into the armored corps, but now I'm not. That was the thing that they were saying at the funeral. They're targeting the people that are going to be around here the longest, right? Like attacking the school board stuff is just really, the same school board that does a land acknowledgement, and then you're sitting here watching
I mean
genocide in a hospital.
The land acknowledgement is there, and also like I went to parent teacher interviews. Probably bad security culture to say this, but at a TDSB school, and that's the walls are plastered with anti-bullying. It's anti-bullying week.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is physical bullying, this is psychological bullying, and I'm just like, how can you have an anti-bullying week when you have a partnership with an organization that's bullying students? Like, just scrap your anti-bullying program, scrap it. Scrap your anti-bullying program, scrap your land acknowledgements. Like, I don't know.
On that level, in the Montreal English School Board, where my kid is in, on October 8th or 9th, put out an Instagram post with like a Israeli flag saying like, we must at this time, recognize the victims of the horrible violence, and we're making a safe space for like students that feel threatened and everything. And it's just, and when I commented on this, they blocked me despite being a parent from the kid in the school board. But not to get too down into the details of that, but it's you see that kind of across the board here right now. But I think like you're getting at something like, not only is there a big discrepancy between like this specific case of like a school board talking about bullying, but it's the, like you said, it's like, how do we go back to business as usual anywhere right now? Like the empire, right? The Anglo-American empire, the rules-based international order, or whatever you want to call it. I mentioned this on Twitter the other day, and a bunch of people got mad because I suggested that Canada was part of the sort of U.S.-led empire, and it upset a bunch of people, which is just like an incontrovertible fact.
What did they think? We're part of the Soviet bloc or something?
I don't know. I was just talking about our empire, how it's losing legitimacy, and they're like, "Oh, you're Canadian, sir. You're Canadian." And I was like, okay, well, I know that. I'm not trying to hide that. But I think it's really something that's interesting to talk about. And like, I think we haven't had a lot of legitimacy for a long time, but I feel like this is like the nail in the coffin of all the things that we project around the world about free speech and liberal democracy and human rights and freedom of the press. We've got our closest ally in the Middle East not only openly murdering journalists and saying the journalists are Hamas and they deserve it, but murdering their families, deliberately targeting their families and murdering their families. It's one of the most sick and depraved things I've ever seen. And the idea that we can go back now whatever happens with this and start wagging our finger at anyone around the world and lecturing them about human rights. Like, who is going to believe this anymore? Like, I really feel like there's been a turning point. Like I said, I think the empire hasn't really had a lot of legitimacy for a while, but this just seems like a real turning point where we can really just not go back to pretending that we really hold any of these values. We're seeing all these values that we claim to care about just so flagrantly violated. Or you want to talk about, how we lecture other countries about liberal democracy and how it's the only form of legitimate democracy. You see these massive protests in the streets for people that want a ceasefire, to want us to stop being complicit in this violence, and just a total disconnect between what people across the ideological spectrum want from their government versus what the government's actually doing. Like, we're seeing fully that we actually don't have any democratic
just says
input.
These are terror rallies. These are Hamas rallies.
Yeah.
All parties just unite to smear hundreds of thousands of people and then deport them. Like Mulrooney and Kinsella, whatever, all these other.
Yeah, we're calling like Jewish Voice for Peace, calling them like anti-Semites and Hamas supporters and terrorism supporters, while jackbooted thugs in the Capitol Police or other police departments are like beating the shit out of them and arresting them. Yeah. And then we're also lecturing people about our values, about anti-Semitism as well. It really feels like
Jewish safety, like Jewish. This is all done. Like if you criticisms of Israel are like at institutions in North America, they make Jews feel unsafe. Meanwhile, like you see Jews arm in arm at like Grand Central Station just being like absolutely manhandled by the police.
It's insane.
Like, how about that Jewish safety? How about the safety of those Jews? Does anybody have anything to say about the safety of those Jews? Or like the ones on the Capitol or the ones in Oakland or like, the ones in Israel? Did you guys see that? You must have seen that video from a few weeks ago of like Orthodox Jews in Israel. And the police just like, and the size difference. I don't know whether they selected just the biggest police, but it's like the Jewish people in the video look like normal sized, and then the police are like a size bigger than the other men, and they're just beating the absolute hell out of them, like chasing them. Like there was I guess you must have seen this video, but it's like somebody with a phone and like this big guy like chases him into this kind of alleyway and like punches him a few times. It closes the gate on him. Whew. Yeah, so that's Jewish safety. Or like that's where they value Jewish safety, right? Like
no, it's insane, and like that's the kind of the thing that I'm interested in exploring right now. This kind of crisis of legitimacy that I think it really just feels like there's this turning point, and that there's no going back to how things were before. Like there's almost like this divorce that's happening between certain people that have been told time and time again that like in order to achieve kind of progressive social change, you have to follow all the rules and you have to vote for the good people and not the bad people, and you've got to go to meetings and do speeches and do not engage in kind of nonviolent protests. And like it just seems like for generations, especially people that support Palestine, have been told like this is how you need to make change. And I don't know. It just seems like we're at this point where there's just no possible way of putting things back to how they were before. So it's frightening. It's frightening in a way to know how to think about how that's going to go. It's also a moment that's, I think, there's a lot of potential for maybe some kind of rapid transition or change to happen as well. But it's very, it's a moment that's really pregnant with a whole lot of different possibilities.
Yeah, and even Israel's role in the empire, right? Like they're supposed to be the villa in the jungle, as they say. They're supposed to be the like offshore, 51st state, securing American interests in the Middle East. And the first thing that happened on October 7th was the Americans had to send massive airlifts and sea lifts for all kinds of weaponry because Israel didn't have enough. They had to pull back their shells from the Ukraine because we can't be giving those to the Ukraine. We'll have to give them cluster bombs instead. Like Israel's whole reason for existence in terms of the empire was that it was supposed to be a reliable partner in this war, and that you wouldn't need to send like 2 aircraft carriers, a Marine expeditionary unit, all your air defenses. They've been running an arms airlift into Israel that hasn't really been covered, I don't think, enough, but every single day, just heavy lift planes dropping off weapons after weapons. Now 6 weeks on from this, and so even Israel itself, that the reasons that it says that it exists and the reasons that they mobilize their civilian population and arm them like the kibbutz, all that has been called into question. The army didn't come to help people on that day, even though even from Justin's story that we can tell that Israelis themselves in those kibbutz defended themselves. That was the first thing that they all did, was run and get their weapons, which Israel allows them to have and not anyone else. Although they're expanding who's allowed to have guns right now. But in Israel, you see lots of guns. The soldiers are all in uniform all the time, going back and forth from their bases with guns. And the settlers all have guns. So it makes it seem like all Israelis have guns, but they don't. They're a particular sector of their society that was armed as a first line of defense kind of thing, just to hold people back, to give them a moment until the army could come in and save everybody. But the army never came in to save everybody. And then the Americans are worried that Hezbollah was going to join the war from the north, and that like within a few days, this whole thing might have turned in such a way for Israel that we would be talking about something very different today. So they had to rapidly mobilize all of this support, which is like the basic reason that Israel is supposed to be, the villa in the jungle, the only democracy in the Middle East. And so if we remember that, like for the 6 months before October 7th, Israel was trying to put through parliament rules to make like essentially a quasi-fascist state. So all that was happening before, which questioned the legitimacy, and a lot of people didn't want to fight. Remember, we were talking at that time months ago about how reserve soldiers didn't want to fight with their units. So all of these really core pillars of reasons for existing, like that Israel is the only safe place in the world for Jews. And then the day after October 7th, they're telling us it was a second Holocaust. They're banning people talking about it in schools because they believe that all the fourth grade students are chanting, 30s era slogans. All of these main pillars of what was supposed to be why we allowed sort of the excesses of Israel, because at the end of the day, they still are a democracy. They still share our values, as the prime ministers always talk about in Canada and have since the creation of Israel. Even those things aren't true. But then when it comes to the actual war fighting, they've been shown to be a liability, not an asset. And without this massive airlift and with thousands of soldiers, they send over the CIA head, they send over the head of the Pentagon, they send over their most important urban warfare specialists to like actually embed them into the decision making in Israel. Can you imagine if it was the opposite of like Iran sending its major military leaders? Like, it's just so absurd to compare the difference. But that's what Israel needs. Israel needs to be propped up after all these years, after all this, hundreds of billions of dollars they've poured into their technological superiority, their startup nation, their signals intelligence, all these Unit 8200 guys who all go and work for Google or create spyware that's used all over the world. Like, this was the whole sort of reason for being for Israel. And even that, when push came to shove, they needed support like they were like a banana republic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like Ukraine's financial and military situation in that sense, right? Like, Ukraine is surviving now militarily and financially because it gets a monthly injection from the US. And it's like, is that how it's going to be now?
Yeah. Well, that's also been the amazing thing about like people like Joe Biden saying like, well, there's just absolutely nothing we can do about this. It's like, there's nothing we could possibly do to stop this. And it's like, well, there literally is. You could stop sending them the money and the weapons which they're using to carry this out. I mean, it's not actually that complicated. So it's
Well, I mean, it's also like, what John just said about like Biden. I mean, what John just said about Israel. Biden said Israel was the greatest investment we could have made.
yeah.
He said we'd have to invent it. This is not it's not a good investment. They're throwing good money after bad now. So I don't know. It's a weird time. It's a weird time, Rob.
It's a very weird time. And it's like, I guess in one sense as well, you can see that there's a panic has been setting in as well. People are seeing like that have supported this. Not only are like people like Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau probably seeing some really ugly numbers about their support that they're losing, but there's this whole generational divide now. Like you saw, I don't know if you heard that leaked phone call from Jonathan Greenblatt at the
we've
ADL.
Been chasing the left, right.
They're panicking. Like they are panicking because the younger generation now is completely rejecting the narrative that they've had full control over for a very long time. That's why they're now talking about banning TikTok as well, because it's like we got to, as if that's going to be the solution to the problem. Because
maybe stop like going to war against children. I don't know.
Well, that's the whole thing. It's
having
like
an explicit war against children might alienate the youth. Who
Yeah,
knows?
you would think that maybe that has something to do with it. And when they suggest that it's due to some kind of nefarious Chinese propaganda algorithm, and not just the fact that people are able to get alternate versions of this narrative rather than the one that's promoted endlessly on our mainstream corporate media and in our political class. And all of a sudden people are able to like get access to different narratives, and they're able to see with their own eyes the violence and depravity that their governments are fully supporting. And they're saying, you know what, I'm against this. I don't like it when my government finances wars where thousands of children are murdered. And, it's like, it's not because of some evil algorithm that's causing people to believe that. That's just like a normal reaction to seeing the kind of things, depraved things that our government is sponsoring right now.
And I think we are seeing like, people get to the point where it's like, you know what, call me Hamas then, call me an anti-Semite then. And it's like those words and those smears are also losing their weight.
That
kind of
that worked for a long time. This idea that and a lot of people that even had really good values and intentions would get these kind of accusations, and they'd say, "Oh, well, I don't want to be accused of that, so I'll condemn all the baddies that I need to condemn, and I'll stop doing the scary phrases and chants that make people uncomfortable." But people realize as well that this is all being made in bad faith, and I'm one of those people. Frankly, I'm just like, I'm not. I decided a while ago. I don't care what people are going to say about me. When it comes to this kind of stuff. And I think there's a lot of people that are taking that kind of attitude
said,
right
now is not the time to be worrying about your media career. You said something like really early on that
I said that really on October 7th, like when this started to happen. I mean, it's like it's easy to support Palestine when they're these kind of perfect victims that are just victims of this kind of colonialist violence. And then when moments come where it becomes more difficult, you see a lot of people that are like, "Ooh, I want to make sure I get the same kind of access. I want to get invited to all the same parties. I want to be part of the same social circles," and then they kind of back away from that. And I think that's one thing that me personally, and I think a lot of other people at this time are just kind of fed up with this kind of trying to play this game, this like no win respectability or civility game. I mean, that's personally one thing that I've just decided I'm not gonna. You're
done with.
No, I'm totally finished with.
I think that's such a shame, right? Because nobody, the main reason people don't want to be called anti-Semites is because they're not.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
So, it makes sense that people are like, I don't want to get fired. I have children. It's like, it's just basic things. Like, and to devalue the term anti-Semitism, just I don't get that play. Israel has played some big cards here. That's one of the biggest ones, that this is a second Holocaust, that there's nowhere that Jews aren't safe in the Toronto District School Board. Like, people don't even know their classmates are Jewish. Like, it's not like it's not. Okay. It's a crazy thing to make up.
Jesse Brown is really the biggest victim of all this when you think about it.
I don't really know. That's a podcast or something.
Is the Canada Land guy?
Okay, never.
Oh yeah, he lost his mind. Is that?
It seems like it. Yeah, he's like
what he was like saying that Oh, I don't know if we're talking out of school here, but I saw
I
that
think he
thread.
referred to Chapters Indigo as a
Jewish-owned
small
bookstore.
As an innocent Jewish person, as if she doesn't support Heseg, the lone soldiers, which is like literally a program where you can volunteer to serve in Israel if you don't know a soul in the country, but you could go and fight in their wars and kill Palestinians, and they'll pay for you to stick around there and live after, and to be comfortable after. Like, I don't think you could find a more involved person than that, because they're literally saying, we'll support you even though you don't know a soul in Israel.
Yeah, like,
you have
and
no
it's
connection.
A lone soldier fund. It's not even like
only
let's
soldiers.
go and learn about Israel, or like let's go and learn about Jewish culture, Jewish history. Like,
it's strictly for the IDF.
Yeah.
And she did the same thing in the 2006 war. She used Indigo money to buy air conditioners for people for soldiers during that war in their bunkers and whatnot. Like, she's a very involved person. And then he gets to use his Canada Land platform and all the work that everyone else has done for him to build that platform. And he gets to use that platform to smash people over the head and say that Heather Reisman was targeted for no reason.
Or framing it like it's some small little.
The day after, he's supposed to be this guy who looks into things, and it's just
he burned it. He burned his card.
He just burned the whole thing down, and it's not even his work.
Yeah, well, yeah, and just not. I mean, understating the involvement but framing it like it's some little small mom and pop Jewish-owned bookstore. It's a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Like, what are we doing here?
Bookstores in all of Canada. When we watched them do it by offering their hardcover bestseller books for wholesale price.
Yeah.
And so nobody else that owns a small bookstore can exist, because Heather Reisman decided she was going to liquidate small bookstores so that she could channel her money into the IDF lone soldier program. And then people anyways,
no,
I know.
It's
people using their platforms that other people built for them as a weapon to hit people with.
Yeah, and I actually did see a thread. I don't know much about Canada. I've never listened to Canada Land.
Me neither.
I don't know what that is.
Me neither, but
I did see him kind of go through and basically attack a whole bunch of left-wing kind of journalists that I do know. Like, he was like, this person's an anti-Semite and that person's an anti-Semite, and Q Anthony's an anti-Semite and Shri Paradkar is an anti-Semite. And so I was just like, wow, this is like a list. It's like a who's who of brown and black people in Canadian media. He's made a list of.
Yeah.
So that's also an interesting, interesting choice, and like an interesting set of targets to choose, and
Well, yeah, and it gets into the idea of like the sort of acceptable kinds of racism and discrimination, and the idea that like how for such a long time, like Islamophobia in particularly has been a totally like acceptable form of discrimination. Like in our media, in our political class, whole media careers have been built. Like people like Ezra Levant and all these fucking absolute scumbags have built entire careers with these like conspiratorial, like Islamophobic things. And now you have people, making lists of like brown lists and black journalists that are the baddies.
Exclusively.
It's really fucked up.
Like 100 tweet thread or whatever.
Yeah. I guess one thing that I've noticed over the last couple of days, I don't want to keep you too much longer because you both have been very generous with your time here, but you just had this President Xi and Biden summit right now. And that's kind of one thing that I find really interesting, because this it seems like a really abrupt shift in tone all of a sudden on China. Because this is something that I've been following a lot on this show for 3 years now. Mm-hmm. The nonstop hostility and saber rattling and aggressiveness and the spy balloon stuff and like all the going to Taiwan and kind of trying, the idea of like turning Taiwan into kind of the next front in this kind of proxy war, like the next sort of Ukraine, to destabilize China, kind of a weapons base, like right on China's doorstep. It seems like really suddenly this shift in tone has happened. And it seems a little bit like there's been this realization, like we, as much as we told Zelensky and Ukrainians that we could protect them, if we just keep pushing up against those red lines. Don't worry, if Putin ever invades, we're going to make sure we take care of you. Nothing. We're gonna give you whatever you need to fight them off. No problem. And it's been like, okay, well, that didn't really work. They just lost hundreds of thousands of people and like 20% of their country, which is now not coming back. You have this new front now opening up in the Middle East, which is like something that I think they had tried to move on from like painstakingly. And now it seems a little bit like they're realizing maybe it's not the best idea to be opening up yet another front here and trying to open up yet another conflict with an even stronger enemy at this point. Like, I don't know if it's if it's a real shift in tone or if it's genuine or whatever, but it does seem like a certain realization is set in that they're stretched really thin right now and they don't have the capacity to protect themselves or protect people in Taiwan or Ukraine or wherever to the extent that maybe they thought they did a year or two ago.
Yeah, but they also, I'm sure you saw, like, they had that meeting and then they asked Biden if Xi Jinping's a dictator, and then he was like, well, he is.
Of course he is, Jack. Know? Yeah.
It's like, why did you bother? Why did you bother with the meeting? What was...
Well, one thing I found interesting about that is that it was another case of Biden kind of saying a true thing in a kind of gaffe. And he explained to everyone what a dictator is, according to like people in the U.S. government, which is just someone that's the leader of a country that's not a Western style liberal democracy. That's all it is. Like if you have a different kind of political system than we do, then you're a dictator. And Biden pretty much spelled that out. That's how meaningless that kind of like that term is in the first place.
Yeah, he also said that Israel's attacks were indiscriminate when he was talking in that same press conference.
They were, but they're not now.
Yeah. Well, he said that Shifa was very careful. He said, and that because he talked to Israel and he was glad that Shifa went that way because up till now he had believed everything was indiscriminate. Which is actually maybe flattering for Israel, because I'm more concerned that they literally have a list of people's names and addresses like they've told us for the last 25 years that they do. And they actually did massacre journalists' families and people who worked in the municipal government for Hamas, and wiped anyone out in a house that had any affiliation to any government organization, which is what it looks like. That's what it looks like when a doctor goes home for the first time, in 10 days and gets bombed inside of his house. Like, that's what it looks like. So I don't know. I mean, it seems indiscriminate when their troops are moving in. They bomb ahead of their troops. But there's certain aspects of this bombing that looks a lot like they're like running off the list of people and just killing anyone that's associated with those journalists.
Well, they brag about their capacity to keep track of everyone, and they know where every missile goes, and they know where everyone is. Like, they know where these journalists live in Gaza. Like, they talk openly about that. So the idea that these are some kind of mistake or an accident is just it's stretches the limit of belief there.
I mean, Israel's always done that, massacred people's families that are involved, like as a punishment or like as a consequence, a basic consequence of their. They kill all of the resistance fighters that they can never reach. They kill their families multiple times over. I mean, we saw they killed Mohammed al-Dura's father's kid. So like they're going back even to like the famous cases of the beginning of the Second Intifada. It's really brutal what's going on, and if the plan for Israel is to move south with this plan, then I think that the only thing you can say is that it is genocide, because the only reason to eliminate hospitals first and then leave the area is if that was your primary and only objective, was to destroy the hospital and make it impossible for people to stay, because you can't stay. You have to have a hospital. People have to have access to a hospital, especially if there's going to be an urban war. So eliminating the hospitals as the primary objective really does look like genocide, killing everybody's family, or killing the journalists themselves, which they did outside of Shifa so that they would leave Shifa hospital just before the invasion. It really does look. It looks like it's not indiscriminate. So maybe it was a double gaff.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, for all the hand wringing about saying like from the river to the sea and how it's genocidal and it makes like Columbia University professors very unsafe and uncomfortable. I mean, they have a plan for one state from the river to the sea called Israel, and it's like like it's not even a secret that they have designs to go even beyond that into Jordan and into Syria, and like,
in their government party manifesto, like in the Likud, the government in their manifesto, like in their founding documents, like that. It's not a secret. The river to the sea is, and it's even bigger, is the Zionist like dream that's built into all these parties.
Yeah.
In the same way that they said that was the reason, because Hamas had it in their founding document from 20 years earlier. That's the reason why they couldn't be involved in trash collection on a municipal level, that those people have to be targeted with death for having literally, not even as ambitious as the Israeli. And it was already their home, which is also always important to remember. Like when Palestinians say from the river to the sea, they mean the area that they used to live in, that was their own country. They're not talking about some taking over something that didn't previously exist to the indigenous population.
Yeah, well,
all the people in the Gaza Strip lived in the Gaza envelope that was attacked on October 7th. They're all from those villages. They moved south into the Gaza Strip. Like Gaza City itself is one of the oldest cities in the world, but the Gaza Strip is an artificial construction that's a massive refugee camp.
Yeah, well, that's been the bizarre thing as well about suggesting that it somehow like threatens the idea of a two-state solution. But it's just like, who really thinks at this point, really? Does anyone that says this really think it's a possibility to have a two-state solution in this problem? It seems like that's been off the table now for probably decades. And it shows how totally out of touch people are in our political class and our media, that they're still saying that like we need to go back to that. But it's like that's not happening though. That's over now. So
Israel built a concrete wall in the West Bank around what would be a Palestinian state, and much smaller than a Palestinian state. So even like for that to happen, even in the most minimalist way for Palestinians, would involve bringing down walls in a very sort of public way that would just be so embarrassing for U.S. and Western officials, right? Like even Michael Ignatieff said that like in 2000, he said, like, looking down, these look like Bantustans flying over in the air. Like that was 22 years ago of building walls, and somebody who wasn't very forthcoming about the realities of Israel can see something that's just so obviously impossible, that you're not creating a state out of these islands that are not contiguous with each other. Well, I mean, they're talking about in Gaza, they're talking about bringing Mohammed Dahlan back, who was the sort of collaborator regime figure who was ousted by Hamas after the election, after he wouldn't turn over his security forces. So they're like reaching back to these things that if you were like even following the conflict for a couple of years, you would know are just completely absurd. But these officials are putting it all on the record, and like Trudeau's tripping over the ceasefire stuff. Like, that stuff's going to all be there in history to be seen. It's so embarrassing. The propaganda is embarrassing. The Western government line on it's embarrassing. It's shameful what they're doing to people's jobs and school kids in this. It's like a comprehensive, I don't even know what to say. It's just so brutal.
Yeah, well, it's the kind of thing that I've been trying to talk about and think about. It just this overall a symptom of this kind of empire in decline, right? It just seems like this is kind of hastening this entire process. So I don't know, but I really appreciate the work both of you do in talking about these issues and informing people, and I'm glad you could both come on to talk about this with me today. It was a really fantastic conversation, so I appreciate it a lot. I don't want to keep you too much longer.
Back at you, Rob. Thanks for having us.
Is there anything, do you want to just let people know where they can find your work, or if there's anything you want to leave us with before we say goodbye?
John does live streams. Electronic Intifada live streams are twice a week. What days are they now, John?
Next week is going to be, I think, Monday and Friday, but you can subscribe at the Electronic Intifada on the YouTube channel. I'm a contributing editor there, following the war pretty closely, so you can find my stuff there, or on Twitter at John Elmer.
Yeah, and then with me, you can do I have Justin Padur Substack. I'm on Substack. I do a lot of that. I do a lot of Substack now. I've been trying to just work there. I have a podcast, The Anti-Empire Project. You can go to podur.org. And then John and I and Nora Barrows-Friedman, also from EI, we do things. We've been doing some podcasts too for The Brief, which is their podcast.
Yeah, those Electronic Intifada live streams have been so invaluable. There was one that I watched on this stream which almost destroyed me when Ali Abunimah was on that kind of tear and talked about, you could see his heart was broken, and he was saying, "I'm sorry." He was saying, "I'm sorry that we failed," and it absolutely crushed.
Both great for the information, but also just makes it sometimes really wrenching to do the shows, because I mean, it's the same with my friends off the show too, is that you're talking to them and then their connection drops, and you just don't know. That's the whole other thing that we're living behind this public journalism, is just all of our friends there, and the constant up and down of trying to understand what our individual friends are going through in this moment. And when they drop off, like I think before Ali had that, like we lost the connection to the people in Gaza, which you're like holding your breath about why that was the case. It makes it just really real if it wasn't already for people.
Yeah, it's been very disturbing, like following journalists from Gaza, and just if sometimes you go to bed at night, you're wondering if you're ever going to hear from them again. It's absolutely surreal.
Okay, guys.
Yeah, as I was saying, thanks to you both for joining the show. It was really fantastic to have you. I appreciate it a lot. We'll do it again sometime.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, guys.
Oh, great stuff. Anand, thanks.
Wow. Okay, Rob. Seriously, wow.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I got to say thank you here. Flower, the Talking Flower, 21 minutes ago, resubbed for 4 months, tier 1. Thank you, Flower. Thank you, Anon, for the 5 gifted subs. Very, very kind of you. Thanks, Anon. I appreciate it. And thanks, King of Barbies. Very, very generous. I really, really appreciate 10 gifted subs from King of Barbies. Very, very kind of you. Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed that talk as well. I was not prepared for it mentally, and also just in terms of like having things like sit down to talk about. But very easy to talk to both of those guys. Again, like I was saying, I'm not just exaggerating. I really appreciate the work that both of them do regularly. We talk about this stuff every day, so it went very well. Oh, hey, Red Scary. Yeah, it was really great. It was really great stuff. And we had links in the chat there for Electronic Intifada and Justin's Substack and all the work that they're doing. So please do support both of them in the work that they're doing. Really, really vital stuff. Yeah, very good. They're very good. If anyone does else want to support the stream, now would be a totally fine time to do that. I'm still going to be here for about another 2 hours or so. But if you do want to support TRRS, and if you enjoy the conversations like the one that we just had, if you've gotten something out of the analysis and the coverage of this situation and other situations that we cover on this show, if you've gotten something out of that over the last couple of weeks, please subscribe if you can, and help support the community and support the work that I do on here. which is $5 a month. It's totally free with an Amazon Prime account. You can convert that to a Twitch Prime sub very easily, totally free of charge. Every little bit helps. It's the only way that I'm able to continue doing this program every day is through the generosity, the extreme generosity, I should say, of the chatters and the viewers, the listeners, the community members. You're the folks that really allow me to continue doing the show. It wouldn't exist without people supporting it and with coming in to watch and listen and chat and engage with what we're doing, and the people that support the show. So if you can, please subscribe. Help me continue doing this program every day. I highly recommend checking out the tanky therapy sessions they do with East as a podcast as well. Those must be fantastic, I imagine. Seema is really probably the one person that needs to be added to that conversation, I think. He's been phenomenal on all this stuff as well.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Subscribers and gifters are the VIPs in our hearts. Absolutely. And Crackety Kraken, thank you for the gifted sub. It is amazing. Strip club breakfast buffet came in, got all the way to number 2 in a one stream, number 2 in sub gifters, and then just disappeared.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. He knows all about the Tuesday morning crew. Spell check. Thanks for 20 months, tier 1. I appreciate that. Thank you. Awesome to see reasonable conversation about the conflict, not just talking heads stumbling over themselves trying to justify it. Yeah, I mean, I've been really I feel really privileged to be able to have this platform where we can do this, where we can have these conversations. Like, these conversations aren't happening in our media. They should be, but they're not. So it's been, I hope it's been valuable. It's been valuable to me, definitely, to come on here and talk with you, all you folks, about this, and people like Justin and John. It's been really, really valuable. So I really appreciate the fact that I have a little bit of a platform to be able to have these conversations. And again, that wouldn't exist without the chat and without the people that support this show. I'm going to put on now, I guess, probably like some kind of video. I do need to just take like a little 5-minute break. Let me just see. What we have here. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. People love videos. It's true. They do. Thank you so much, Diego, for the gifted sub. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. When you get back, you can turn in your excuse for missing book club. I mentioned this yesterday, Red Scare. I don't know if you were around, but I was in... there was that whole unrigged launch that we did the other day, and then we had a little get together last night. There was like the unrigged launch party, which as a media figure and a part of that project, I had to put in an appearance. I am working on catching up to the rest of you, and I'm reading the Rodney book. I'm trying to catch up to it, to where you are. Hope I will really, really try to be at the next one. It is really, like, I'm really enjoying the book so far, and it's really, really valuable. So I would really like to be a part of that. I just got to try and catch up. Back half of chapter 4 next week. Okay. I can do it. I can do this. I can do this. So what do we have here? Let's see. There's something with Brian Becker. Who's Brian talking to?
Let's do that. Yeah.
We need a non.
Whoops.
Israeli
There's
military forces raided Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital.
I'll be right back.
Including the emergency department, the surgical department, and the maternity ward. People all over the world this Friday, November 17th, are going on strike. They're demonstrating. They're going to shut it down in solidarity with the people of Palestine. Welcome to the Socialist Program. I'm your host, Brian Becker. Today we're talking with Leanne Sima Fulihan, a popular educator, organizer, the education director at the People's Forum, and an editor at 1804 Books. Welcome to the show, Leanne.
Thank you for having me.
All around the world on Friday, people are going to be in the streets. Here in New York City, where we are, in Washington, D.C., in Atlanta, in San Francisco, in L.A., all over the Middle East. The students in occupied Palestine have called for a day of walkout. This is going to be massive. This is going to be something unlike anything the world has experienced, at least in the recent history. But it takes place in the context of this horror. The Israeli government has seized the hospital. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, they were saying, oh, we didn't bomb that hospital. That was a rocket from Islamic Jihad or something like that, some nonsense. They were bombing hospitals. Now they've seized the hospital. Patients are running for their lives. The Biden administration seems not to have a problem with it. As a matter of fact, we're going to have a clip which we'll play in a little while from the Pentagon saying, oh, no, it's fine to take over hospitals and crush hospitals because Hamas was using it as a military operation center. We're going to talk about whether that's true or not. But anyway, this is the context, a war against civilians, 11,000 plus, maybe 12,000. We don't really know. But the Israeli government is deliberately killing civilians. It's not because they happen to be in harm's way. When you do this, you know you're killing civilians.
Absolutely. And you can see it echoed from the statements that the Israeli military officials are saying, from people who are famous popular culture icons, figures. People know what's happening, both inside Israel and outside, people who are with Israel and people who are against Israel's genocide. Everyone knows what's happening. It's very clear. This is a massacre of civilians. It is an outright move to actually try to move the Palestinian people out of sections of Gaza and perhaps all of Gaza. And there's no denying it. No matter how many times Biden gets on national television and tries to just say statements to the contrary, the visible proof is right in front of the whole world.
And the whole world is changing. I mean, there are massive protests. I talked in the beginning that this Friday there's going to be this massive global day of protest. On November 4th, you were there. You were one of the speakers in Washington, D.C., a demonstration of over 300,000 people. One thing that was very noteworthy was people were chanting, and by the way, this was the biggest
Frankenpanty. This is the conversation earlier was a great listen, much appreciated. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you could tune in.
Palestine demo support for Palestine in U.S. history. People were chanting, ceasefire now, ceasefire now. A couple days ago in Washington, D.C., well, actually yesterday in Washington, D.C., a pro-Israeli demonstration was taking not far away from where we were on November 4th. And when one of the speakers, Van Jones, who shouldn't have been there in the first place, but when he said, well, I'm against Hamas rockets, but I'm also against the bombing of the people of Gaza, the whole crowd erupted with the chant, no ceasefire. So you have on one side people chanting ceasefire now and the pro-Israeli crowd chanting no ceasefire. So that's not just a pro-Israeli crowd, that's a pro-war demonstration.
It was wild that that rally was not covered at all by mainstream news. Yeah, and on the contrary, this like pro-Israel rally of people just like drastically overstating the number of people, right? They'll understate the people at the pro-Palestine rallies, which is drastically larger than any of these like pro-Israel things. They're like, there were 300,000 people at this Israel rally, and it's like, no, there were not. There was not even close to that. It's like, it's amazing. It is Trump style. As much as these libs complain about Trump, they're doing all the exact same tricks, even the exact same location. It's the biggest inauguration you've ever seen. It was the biggest pro-Israel rally you've ever seen. The one MSNBC spot I saw said tens of thousands of people. There were literally hundreds of thousands. Yeah, and then they say there's like 200,000 at the pro-war, the pro-genocide rally. It's just preposterous.
Backed by U.S. Congress people, backed by the White House, obviously supported by the mainstream media. The New York Times was advertising it the day ahead of time. On November 4th, for the pro-Palestine demo, the New York Times didn't even send a reporter. They did not even send a reporter. There was coverage, but it wasn't because they had a reporter there. Anyway, we have this divergence in the world. People who actually want peace, but also want justice, meaning an end to occupation. And then the forces that are really now have identified themselves as basically the war party. Go ahead.
No, exactly. It's a moment of reckoning for the Israeli project. So long it's survived by creating this kind of public consent, especially among the U.S. population and other Western countries, by saying that Israel is in a defensive position against these terrorist or forces or the surrounding Arab states. But now it's impossible to continue that narrative. It's exactly like what you said. Comparing the two rallies is a very clear example. You have people who are calling for a ceasefire. That's the first step. I mean, that's just a basic human
Absolutely,
principle. Stop
skeleton.
bombing civilians. And on the other side,
Right
you
out of
have
the
people
Inventing
who say
Reality
stand
playbook.
with Israel, kill civilians, no ceasefire. I mean, it's a complete exposure of what's actually behind the Israeli project. There's no more denying now that in order for Israel to actually achieve what its goal is the ethnic cleansing, the genocide of the Palestinian people, something that it has been trying to carry out for over 75 years.
So here we had a couple of weeks ago, Israel was saying, look, we didn't bomb the hospital, the other hospital, not Al-Shifa. That was an errant rocket that was fired by one of the Palestinian resistance groups. And so that became the story in the media. Did Israel do it or not do it? Rather than the obvious story, which is Israel was doing it to hospitals all over Gaza. And now that it's clear that Israel has deliberately seized Al-Shifa Hospital, and the patients are literally, one, dying because there's no anesthesia, there's no electricity, there's no water. You see these horrific pictures of doctors tending to people and making decisions about who's going to be treated based on who's more likely to live. In other words, complete triage. But now it's open. Now the Pentagon says, yeah, they're there. They took it over, but it's legitimate. I want to play a clip. This is from Sabrina Singh, the Pentagon spokeswoman. She's telling the reporters at the Pentagon press briefing the other day, yeah, this is cool. This is great because Hamas is using it for a command and control. And then listen to how she deals with the reporters who are, well, to put it mildly, somewhat skeptical. Let's listen.
We do have information that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad uses some hospitals in the Gaza Strip, including the Al-Shifa Hospital.
We have information.
As a way to conceal and support their military operations.
We've got the info. We got the intel.
They have tunnels underneath these hospitals. And so Hamas and PIJ members operate a command and control node from Al-Shifa Hospital.
The
in
raw
Gaza
intelligence.
City. They have weapons stored there.
This intelligence assessment is gathered based on information provided by Israel?
Sorry, what I just read
of course
out,
it's from the
that's our
IDF.
intelligence community.
So, did you have any assets inside Gaza?
We have no assets or boots on the ground in Gaza.
So there's no gathering on the ground about this?
That's right.
So you have no one entering the hospitals to verify this information, right?
We have no boots on the ground in Gaza.
How was that assessment, how did you conclude that assessment based on information received from your Israeli counterparts?
Well, I'm not going to get into more specifics on how our intelligence is collected.
They have no boots on the ground, Leanne, but they know for sure that Hamas is there. I mean, this is obviously a proof that America is basically an extension of Israeli propaganda. It's essentially an extension of Israeli propaganda.
We've seen this so many times. I mean, you referenced the bombing of the Al-Ahli hospital a few weeks ago. Actually, time is such a blur now with the rapidity of the changing situation. And Biden gets on television and says Israel did not bomb the hospital. He had to go on national television from the highest position of the White House and say
Netanyahu
to
the next
the American
day.
public, to try to appease the public, to try to put out the Israeli talking points that Israel did not bomb the hospital. And you see here again, this reminds me a lot of the whole myth around weapons of mass destruction, where the whole American public was supposed to just believe the intelligence with no proof. And it's really just a pretext for more massacre, for more war, for imperialist gains that do not actually align with the narrative that the US wants people to think. Israel is defending itself, they're protecting human lives, that Hamas is the main aggressor here.
Yeah, and very frankly, I mean, most people are not going to watch Sabrina Singh's obvious inability to prove her point.
Right.
They're going to see the headlines. Al-Shifa Hospital has been seized by Israelis. Good. Why? Because Hamas is using it as a military command post. How do we know? Because we're reading headlines in the Washington Post. We're reading headlines in the New York Times. We're watching CNN. We're watching the corporate-owned media that's, completely connected to the U.S. military-industrial complex, always echoes Israeli talking points. So yeah, on our show, on the Socialist program here on Breakthrough News, you can listen to Sabrina Singh, obviously unable to actually document why this intelligence is true, but it won't matter. It won't matter because the masses of people are actually having their opinions formed by the headlines. The only thing that's new, really, and I think it's fundamentally new, is the mass grassroots protest movement is so vast, it's so everywhere, it's unlike anything that's ever existed in the United States, that the media can't actually ignore it. College campuses are trying to repress students, they're expelling students, they're suspending students, but they can't stop the students. And right now we see that this movement demanding, a ceasefire, but of course a ceasefire is a way to stop the immediate bloodshed, but not it's not the solution. The solution is to end the illegal occupation of Palestinian lands. I mean, this sort of measurable mass movement of protest and opposition, it can't be ignored.
Absolutely. It absolutely cannot be ignored. Last night, there were many emergency rallies once the raid of Al-Shifa Hospital started, because it's very clear who the victims are. I mean, Al-Shifa Hospital didn't just have patients. It had over 5,000 civilians who had been displaced from their homes and were taking shelter.
Yeah. Okay, not muted. Yeah, Red Scary, talking about the guns they found in the hospital. If you're going to impress Americans, you're going to need to pump those numbers up. And like I talked about I talked about this in the conversation with Justin and John, but like the shifting goalposts, right? What we were told repeatedly was that under Al-Shifa Hospital is like the command center. It's the Hamas command center, sprawling network of tunnels, weapons, their whole operations running out of there. That's why we got to conquer this whole hospital. So it's like, yeah, then you see the moving goalposts. They're like, oh yeah, by the way, it's not actually the command center. It turns out there's just there's some dusty old AKs that you could probably go into any house in like suburban Arizona and probably find a similar kind of arsenal. So now the goalpost is moving. Now it's a node, or like we were saying, and now the actual outpost is in the south where we told people to evacuate to. It's just absolutely preposterous the way that the narrative shifts, the goalpost shifts, and people are expected to just go along with it. And I know many people do, but this is why so many people, especially young people, are rejecting this. They're completely rejecting this narrative because it's like people are not that stupid. Like people know when they're being openly, brazenly lied to, especially when they can turn on Twitch or YouTube or TikTok or whatever and get access to information that counters that narrative. And Arizona guy could probably compete with Hamas headquarters. Probably, yeah, I think so as well. Yeah, the command center. We did a little cartoon. We made a little cartoon of the command center. That's our proof. That's our evidence. It looks like a Fortnite level. It's amazing. Yeah, and they cemented up the old tunnels. So they're saying like, yeah, the tunnels were there, but they cemented them up. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Turns out the tunnels were decoys, and the MRI room was the real command center. Really smart of Hamas. No one would expect them to store guns right next to the MRI machine. Exactly. It's the last place that people would look. Storing them all our laptops and dangerous weaponry around this gigantic magnet. It's the last place the IDF would ever check. Wonder how much of the intel Israel claims they have is just coerced out of the 15K in prison. I mean, that could be part of it. Like I said in that conversation, it seems like the whole fixation on hospitals has been in reaction to the outcry. The outcry that took place, like she was mentioning, like when they bombed the Al-Hali hospital. Like there's this big international outcry. And then it went from like, we would never dream of targeting hospitals. What are you talking about? It must have been Hamas or Islamic Jihad or someone else that did that. And then they spend 2 weeks manufacturing the worst propaganda you've ever seen, all about all these different hospitals, which are actually the main Hamas bases, actually. So not only would we never dream of targeting a hospital, but now we're going to spend 2 weeks putting out the absolute most dog shit level propaganda you can imagine to justify why we need to go after every hospital now. It's unbelievable. The whole thing is just completely like backwards. Yeah, and now they're saying the place we told you to flee is our next military target. Now it's saying that it's actually in the south. It's actually in southern Gaza. That's where the actual command center is. It's so brazen. Worse than dog shit. I'm still can't get over that nurse video, honestly. Like I really I knew how bad this stuff was, but I really was not expecting it to be as bad as it was. Like it's like a joke, honestly. Like it's either it's inept or they're just laughing at us. I can't even tell what it is anymore. Ya Allah, I can't believe I'm doing this. Hamas has taken over the hospital. They're taking all the morphine. It's like, what the fuck, man? Jesus Christ.
And the Israeli occupation forces went in there and they put people into a courtyard.
Now
in the
it's
middle of the
communist.
rain.
Once they're done destroying the medical system there, they'll say it's actually in Rafah. Yeah, there we go. It is really unbelievable.
There's reports that
And yeah, sorry, not to keep interrupting, but Frankenpanty says, I don't believe this is vengeance driven from the attack in October. That event was just the catalyst they were waiting for to use as an excuse for the final push of this decades-long project, which would be why they don't really want the hostages back. They need them to uphold the manufacturer consent. Yeah, I agree. The whole thing was just pretext to, like, that's why you end up going down that kind of conspiracy idea of, like, was it allowed to happen? Like, and how much of that was, like, intentional, how much wasn't, we can have those kind of discussions. But definitely the whole thing has been like, well, I guess we'll have to do the ethnic cleansing that we've wanted to do now for decades. And yeah, like we were saying in that conversation, releasing hostages goes against that. It makes that more difficult, especially when the hostages are out there saying like, no, we were treated well. It wasn't nice being kidnapped, but we were treated well. And meanwhile, they're bombing into the fucking ground, the place where these other hostages are supposed to be. Anyway, let's continue this.
Went in there and they put people into a courtyard in the middle of the rain. There's reports that they're making people take off their clothes for interrogations and searches. They bombed warehouses that had the very few medical supplies they may be left. They're trying to get the doctors to leave. They're trying to impose these scare tactics on people who have nowhere else to go because they've been bombed out of every other place of shelter. And this is something that the public cannot actually accept. There's just no way that they can accept a narrative that this is somehow a legitimate military target. And so for the past weeks, for the past days, the movement for Palestine has only been growing. In a sense, the total attempt to control the narrative has been completely backfiring because of how obvious it is that the White House is not only lying, but it's actually working in tandem with the Israeli project, with the Israeli forces. It is, in a sense, orchestrating this genocide that is happening in front of our eyes. I mean, last night was proof. Yesterday was proof. The White House says Hamas is operating out of a hospital. A few hours later, Israeli siege on the hospital is happening. I mean, you can't. This is no longer something that we can ignore, and the public is not going to accept it. The polls are showing it as well. There's never been lower support for Israel among the American public before.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. There's one element that I want to highlight here as we get started. The pro-Israeli war party, and that's what it is, the people who don't want a ceasefire, who want to keep bombing and killing civilians, they say this is a struggle between Hamas, a terrorist organization, which is carrying out unprovoked attacks against Jews, and this is a pogrom against Jewish people, similar to what happened to the Jewish population in Europe during the fascist period, 1933 to 1945. That's the line. And you see supporters of Israel, sometimes crying and saying, "Oh, I feel unsafe now because people are."
Thank you for the invite to Brazil, Brazilian radical. If I'm ever able to come and stay at your home in Brazil, I'd be delighted to. Thank you for that.
Are standing with Palestine. It's not just Palestinians who are out in the streets, and it's not only Americans who are sympathetic to the Palestinians. It's large numbers of Jewish people in the United States and around the world are saying no to the Israeli government's genocide. I mean, here in New York City, Grand Central Station taken over by Jewish Voices for Peace. There are Jewish protests, Jewish-led protests everywhere. Again, the media may want to provide the narrative Jews versus Arabs, Jews versus Muslims, terrorists versus Israel. More and more Jewish Americans, at least, don't want to identify with apartheid, don't want to identify with genocide, and they're standing up. From my point of view, that means that the end is coming in terms of the domination of this narrative, even if they still have the corporate mainstream media echoing the propaganda.
I think you're right, because in particular, who would want to be used as justification for a genocide? Even the Jewish people who may have family in Israel don't want to be used as the reason, as the name for this genocide that's happening, that the whole world is rising up against. People are really shifting, and I think you're right. The fact of the matter is that the narrative, that the pro-war narrative, the pro-Israel narrative, has all the money, has all of the richest institutions behind it. And after October 7, it put everything to try to repress and to make sure that it was the only narrative that was dominating. You saw so many reports of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and other think tanks immediately started making comparisons to 9/11, saying this was worse than 9/11, this was 10 9/11s, all sorts of stuff to try to really manipulate the American public and the world as a whole to just not be able to speak up. And they failed. In a matter of weeks, it has completely shifted. They are now on the defensive. And they have to keep on justifying and explaining their own actions, minimizing their own actions, trying to manufacture new data or without even real data. Netanyahu is now saying that he won't say how many civilians died, but he's saying it's not so many. They're on the defensive, and this is a really big marker. I do think that it's marking a shift, a change. Israel is not going to be able to
10/9/11s is funny.
Popular support.
It's an amazing way to
that it's relied on. I don't think popular, but kind of manufactured support that the White House media institutions have managed to orchestrate for it for the past decades. Things are changing for sure.
Well, we have an NBC clip that it's an interview with Benjamin Netanyahu, the head of state of Israel. Now, Netanyahu has been treated with kid gloves for a long time. His current government is made up of far-right Jewish white supremacists. And masses of people prior to October 7th in Israel were protesting against Netanyahu. That protest movement has basically ended right now. But Netanyahu, even during the Obama era, he was invited to speak to Congress. He spoke before both houses of Congress as if almost like the State of the Union address. And he attacked the sitting president of the United States at that time, President Barack Obama, who was pursuing a negotiation for the so-called Iran nuclear deal, which Trump then ripped up when he came into office. But Netanyahu was there in front of Congress trashing President Obama's primary foreign policy initiative, and yet he was getting standing ovations. So, but Netanyahu has been treated with kid gloves.
And then the Democrats ended up trashing the whole thing anyways. So great political party.
Really kid gloves, no matter what he does, by the U.S. media. Now, let's listen to this NBC interview, because it speaks to what you're saying. Even the mainstream media, even the apologists, the historical apologists for Israel, because of the pressure from below and the horrific images that no one can deny, the tone is changing. I want to have our listeners and people watching this show actually watch this, because it's quite different.
A number of the protesters are protesting the actions by Israel. Even the Secretary of State saying, quote, far too many Palestinian civilians have been killed. Let me ask you this. How many civilian deaths are you willing to bear in order to achieve your ultimate goal of eradicating Hamas?
If I had my way, there wouldn't be a single civilian death. If I had my way, no civilians would be killed. If Israel had its way and our calls would be heeded, they'll all be out of harm's way. And in fact, I'm saying this luckily now, and fortunately, hundreds of thousands have moved out of harm's way, heeding our calls and overcoming
Mr. Philadelphia.
Hamas's threats at them at gunpoint not to leave the zone.
Do you know how many civilians have been killed,
think,
Mr. Prime Minister? Do you know how many civilians have been killed? Do you have an accounting of the number?
I wouldn't trust the Hamas numbers. When you say Gazan officials, that's Hamas officials.
What's
that's
your number? What's
ISIS
your
officials
number?
It's lower than theirs. And what is most important, Kirsten, is that we see a steady decline.
It's
in the
not
number
lower
of
than theirs.
civilians.
They've been bragging about the number. They've been bragging about that number and saying, like, this is the number of terrorists that we've killed. It's amazing you see what they project to the West versus what they air on their own, like, state media. They're going with those same numbers that he's telling you to doubt. They're going with those numbers and being like, this is good. It's good that we're doing this.
That's as our ground action proceeds, because basically people understand that they have to clear the way and they leave, but you have to do everything in your power to lay the blame for the civilian casualties on where it belongs, on Hamas. We don't want to make human shields an effective strategy for terrorists.
I don't think Netanyahu's...
What makes human shields an effective strategy
This is some
for
guy, Rob
terrorists?
Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
What makes human shields an effective strategy for terrorists, as Netanyahu is just saying, is dropping bombs on and murdering those people. I think that's what makes it an effective strategy. Majority Report, thanks very much for the raid. Hello, Majority Report, welcome. I will lay the blame of civilian deaths on the people killing them. I think that's more the way I would do it as well. Sam Sater, what a fucking nightmare. Hello, everyone. Welcome in. It's me, Rob. It's nice to see you. Please smash the follow button. If you have not already, please go ahead and smash the follow button. We're just, we had a great conversation earlier with Justin Potter and John. Wait. Hold on. John Elmer. I was about to say John Cryer, but he's the guy from 3 Men and a Baby. No, that's with Ted Danson and Steve Guttenberg. I'm of course referring to 2.5 Men, the sitcom, and was also on a number of classic 80s films as well. Anyway, that was really great stuff. And now we're watching this video with Brian Becker talking about the war and talking about what Israel is doing right now. What the fuck are you talking about? It's okay. Let's not worry about it. Okay? We're doing fine. Anyway, thanks for joining us. As you can see, Majority Report Raiders, this is a professional news organization over here, and I'm a professional journalist and commentator, as you can tell from my professional delivery and everything that's been happening over the last 45 seconds or so. Let's continue this video. We're watching this video with Brian Becker from Breakthrough News. He's speaking with Leon Sima Fulahan popular educator, organizer, the education director at the People's Forum, and an editor at 1804 Books. Really great conversation so far. Let's continue. Thank you again for joining us today. Thank you.
Had that kind of an experience on an American TV station?
I don't think so. There's a lot to unpack here. That's a really, really interesting interview to actually watch in its full, but really a very interesting sign. The way she even framed the question in the beginning, how many civilian deaths are you willing to accept? Already she's pushing him. She's operating off of the premise that there's already too much.
Brian is with PSL
and his
and
response
the Answer
is absolutely
Coalition.
absurd. I mean, he's saying that there's a decline in civilian deaths, that he wishes there were none. And then he says almost to
2 men and a baby being IDF soldiers sperm jacking their fallen comrade, but it's beyond my comedic ability. You know, I think just what you just did now worked pretty well for me personally. What the hell is going on with that? We haven't even talked about that. What is going on with that? IDF sperm collection units. This is where we're at now. This is where we're at. This is what, if you're American and Canadian, but if you're American, this is where your tax dollars are going. You're funding IDF posthumous sperm collection units. It is eugenics. Yeah, that is a big part of it as well. But wouldn't it be better to if it's really that important, maybe you save the sperm prior to death and not afterwards? If it's really that important, why don't you just take a sample from people, you throw that in the freezer or whatever, in case you need it later? What is this posthumous sperm collection thing? What the fuck's going on? What is this? What is happening? What the hell? Keep that freak shit to yourself, please. I don't know what's going on. All my lib friends are yelling at me. Oh, so I guess you don't want the IDF to keep collecting jizz. Your privilege is really showing. That's it. It's actually anti-Semitic to ask questions about this. It's anti-Semitic to ask questions about the IDF sperm collection, posthumous sperm collection unit. Anyway.
To remind her of her job, he says, it's your job to make sure the blame is laid on the correct body, which is Hamas. It's almost as if he's saying, hey, what are you doing here?
Where am I? I'm not supposed, you're the American capitalist media. You're not supposed to say things like this to me.
And you can actually, I watched that interview a little bit ago, and it's funny because it's almost as if he's really frustrated with the
Corpse Corps,
with the U.S. because he starts off in the beginning earlier when they ask, how long is it going to take? How long is it going to take for your so-called victory, for you to eradicate Hamas? And he's like, well, not as long as it took you to eradicate ISIS. It's not going to take that long. He's kind of jabbing at the United States, trying to provoke it in a sense, remind the U.S. of its duty towards Israel. He's really been kind of lashing out. After Macron called for a ceasefire, he immediately responded, reminding France, saying, well, by the way, the terrorist attacks that are happening to us could happen to you at any moment. It's almost like a veiled threat.
Yeah, it seems like a threat.
Remind the West that they need to be.
Which is weird because you heard the same kind of talk coming from Zelensky, didn't you? Next it's going to be, if you don't back us now, there's going to be terrorist attacks in the West. It's like, do you have some kind of information here that you're not revealing? Both from Ukraine and from Israel kind of suggesting this. Really strange. And people like Malcolm Nance, people that are connected to the intelligence world and the media world, who volunteered to go not fight, but to put on a Ukrainian uniform, kind of saying like, oh, there's going to be terrorist attacks. There's going to be Hamas attacks in America. Like, how do you know, sir? Really weird and kind of sinister. That I will say, I don't want to speculate too much on that, but that is one thing that I think a major terrorist attack at this time would be probably the thing to completely, whatever semblance of a real society we had would probably be completely destroyed at that by that. It feels like the CIA is kind of cooking something here, something pretty dark. So we're gonna have to, if that moment does come, we can remember this conversation, and we're gonna know that there's more to it than whatever we're being told.
Be behind this kind of anti-terrorism flag that they all bear against the axis of evil, as they say. He says in the interview also.
It'd be a damn shame if terrorism showed up in your small town near the Bush era.
Biden used, reminding people of their so-called unity behind the.
What would impress Americans terror-wise? We have mass shootings like every week, but we know that there's a difference though between mass shootings carried out by like 4chan addicted white neo-Nazi incels who probably have people from this FBI or whatever on the other end on Discord being like, yeah, no, I think that's a good idea for you to do that. Versus when it's carried out by someone in the name of like, Islamic fundamentalism. There's a big difference in the way those stories are covered and the massive reaction to them. Blow up the Las Vegas sphere. I mean, you don't even care when a guy in Las Vegas commits one of the largest mass shooting in American history. Wasn't that in the media for about a week, maybe? Ragdijin, thanks for the gifted sub.
This effort to suppress the resistance, in particular in the Arab world, and they're not towing the line enough. He's panicking. He's in a really bad position.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really agree with you. And I want to talk with you about where American allies are going right now, because I don't mean the allies in the global south, which are largely dependent on the U.S., but countries like Canada, like France. Of course, Britain is going to be always the puppy dog for U.S. imperialism, but some of the other countries, because there's mass protests where they are. Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, was interrupted even yesterday while he was having dinner. There are protests everywhere. I want to talk about that, but before I do, I want to just focus and help our audience understand what it means when the capitalist imperial media, the media that's really loyal to the United States, loyal to Israel, loyal to the military-industrial complex, when they start to have sort of the beginning of what appears to be like an oppositional tone to U.S. policy, it's a reflection of a division within the U.S. ruling class. The media is the ruling class. So if you're starting to see some contrary point of view, that means there's a fight going on behind closed doors in the boardrooms or in the suites. We know lots of people in Congress, staff aides are signing petitions. When I was a teenager during Vietnam, what we're seeing every day in Gaza, this horrific thing, we watch that every day in the United States, except it was Americans, young people who were going to be sent to fight and die. So in American families, like when I was 12 or 13 or 14 or 15, each year as I got closer to 18 and I was going to be drafted, as were my siblings.
That's fucked up.
We were talking about, are we going to go there? Are we going to, and then the media started showing how horrific the war was. And in 1968, Walter Cronkite, who was the premier sort of newsman for America, said, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. That meant all of this suffering and carnage and horror was for nothing because the U.S. was going to lose. And that's when we had this explosion.
And it went on for 7 more years after.
Of anti-war sentiment, where instead of it being kind of a militant minority, it became...
Rockefeller says claiming that people in the FBI are coaxing people to commit murder is a really serious charge. Rockefeller, there's documented evidence of that. That was the whole FBI counterterrorism strategy for fucking years. Going and convincing people to go carry out terrorist attacks and then being like, oh, hey, we stopped the terrorist attack from happening, and give themselves a big medal. Give them a big awards ceremony. There's documented evidence of them doing that. You should look into the Boston Marathon bombing, where there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that points to them possibly being connected to that and being one of those exact cases that got out of hand. You name names. Just go Google the thing that I'm saying right now. Type FBI counter-terror strategy into Google, and then you can maybe take a look at that and see some of the results that come up. And you might be really interested by some of the the results that you see. You might be really interested in some of the info. There's Red Scary in The Guardian. That took 5 seconds. The Guardian. FBI entrapment fake terror plots. There you go. Go give that a read, and then you can come back and tell me whether that's a serious charge or not. I wonder how many FBI informants were part of the January 6th incident as well. I'd think of quite a lot of them, but oh well.
A huge majority of Americans, and that became a factor in U.S. politics. So there's this kind of intersection between consciousness, media coverage, what's happening in the military, the actual what's going on the ground. I feel that interview on NBC and some of the other indicators that we have show that sectors of the U.S. ruling class know that being completely tied to Netanyahu and Israel right now is not only bad.
I typed FBI entraps Muslim into the search bar, by the way, for any fellow scholars out there. Oh, Rockefeller, please. Bad apples. Do you hear yourself, sir? Come on now. There are bad apples in the field, police, spies, and anything. My goodness.
Losing cause for the U.S. government, and as
Sir.
a dominant empire in the world, that's not unimportant.
Absolutely.
Rockefeller, come on now.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that in some sectors, Israel is being seen as a liability. I mean, the U.S. has suffered a lot of failures in its agenda, in particular in the Arab region and in Western Asia. I mean, they failed after 20 years of an operation in Afghanistan. Iraq is not really looking like a success in their eyes either. And this latest Israeli war on Gaza is not only a war on Gaza, it's also, there's other fronts that are opening up, and the U.S. is having to get involved. I mean,
how's the weather down in Langley right now, by the way?
It's significant that there's
Is it
been
nice
attacks
down
on
there?
U.S. bases across the region as well. And so the United States has to look at this very carefully. Do they want to ally themselves with really what looks like a lose-lose situation?
Do you live in Langley or do you
has
commute from elsewhere?
Basically declared that the only definition of victory is the full eradication of Hamas. And to eradicate Hamas, which is not simply just one small military organization, it is elected to power in Gaza. It's not only Hamas who is fighting for the Palestinian cause. There are many different factors and sectors across society that are resisting in different ways. So to even say that this is a war on Hamas is incorrect. Inside Israeli society as well, there's ruptures, there's breaks. People don't want to do this. Like you said, in Vietnam, the difference here was that it was the American people that were going to be sent to sacrifice themselves for a losing battle. And in Israel, it's looking the same way. I mean, it's a very militarized society. Every single young person has to join the military, and their boots on the ground are all conscripts. So they're people who are going about their daily lives, and suddenly they have to go fight. They don't want to do this for going forward. There's a lot of pressure coming from many different directions, and Netanyahu was already on thin ice. And every time he's on thin ice, he starts some sort of war so that he can get reelected again. He gives the Israeli public no choice, and he's dragging the U.S. into this losing game. I think it's a matter of time until the splits in the ruling class get deeper, because why would the United States, who's already suffered so many losses in the region, want to tie themselves again to a sinking ship?
Yeah, really important for everybody who's watching this show or listening to this show to really think about this. During the Iraq invasion, which was also premised on lies, that Iraq was this mortal danger, weapons of mass destruction, and there was this mass movement. We were, as a leader of the Answer Coalition, I was helping to organize it, and we had hundreds of thousands of people coming out every month in mass demonstrations. And then the Bush administration kind of rushed to the war on March 19, 2003, and they had this huge offensive against the Iraqi government. And in 3 weeks, by August 9th of 2003, the Saddam government fled. So in 3 weeks, this sort of victory was achieved for the United States, and then Bush could get on that aircraft carrier, the Abraham Lincoln, which was, in this actually in the harbor in San Diego, but he got on and pretended he was a great war hero and wore his bombardier jacket and said, mission accomplished, which of course was, not true because the resistance was just beginning. But my point is they ended it in 3 weeks, and then Bush looked like, he was in the saddle. The anti-war movement had been defeated because the U.S. won. But if the war goes on and on and on and there's no military victory, then public opinion, which is generally speaking mortified about war, mortified about the carnage, certainly mortified about killing all of these civilians, it starts to turn. And then once it starts to turn, it usually doesn't turn back. So it seems to me that we are at one of those moments. Unless the Israelis can actually achieve something militarily and defeat, quote, Hamas, or drive everybody out of Gaza, if the only thing they can do is keep killing kids every day, and 1 out of every 200 people in Gaza is now dead, 1 out of every 200, then the world is going to keep turning. The world's going to keep turning. In other words, the U.S. government doesn't really care that much about Israel or Jews or Muslims or Christians or people. The U.S. government cares about its geostrategic standing. And if this war keeps going and there's no victory, no military victory over Hamas, I think Israel's goose is cooked, and I think the U.S. will tend to move away from Netanyahu, certainly.
Absolutely. And I think it's actually interesting to look at the very brief history of the U.S. and Israeli alliance. The U.S. wasn't automatically, unconditionally behind Israel. Until 1967, actually, it wasn't.
And just to comment on what's been going on in the chat, I don't know if Rockophile is still watching, but that's the thing. Talking about the FBI, there's some people that are corrupt. You're saying that every 35,000 FBI agents are corrupt? No, actually, I'm not saying they're corrupt. I'm saying they're doing their basic jobs. That's not corruption. That's actually just fulfilling their basic responsibilities, which are to, among other things, nefarious ways of entrenching power structures in America. One of those things, though, is engaging in these entrapment schemes and convincing people to engage in terrorist attacks, which they then stop. That's not corruption. That's just them doing their jobs. That's what their job is. It's their job to entrap mentally unstable people. That's quite literally what it is. Or to engage things like COINTELPRO and infiltrating activist groups, disrupting social movements. This is not corruption. This is what these people do. That's what their job is. Or running psyops right here on twitch.tv.
Really all the way in. It was still kind of weighing its options. It was considering the playing field. It's not kind of this, there's a narrative that people would like to think is true, that the U.S. stands behind Israel because it's a moral position. It's not. It's a calculation. And from the
I'm
very
not a
beginning,
fan. I told you, if this is a psyop, I would tell you.
Israel because it was advantageous for its imperialist agenda in the region. Israel was a watchdog for it, in a sense. Sending equipment, military equipment and weapons to Israel is basically like arming themselves. They're so...
a projection of
exactly.
American power.
Absolutely. It's almost like a big American military base in the middle of a region that they're struggling to control. And
RFK
never
Jr.
actually
spelled
have
this
been
out
able
for
to
everybody the other day.
Dominate fully.
Anti-imperialist hero.
And if that's not going to be feasible anymore, if that's not successful, there's no reason for the United States to keep on tying itself to it. It's always been a calculation. It's not actually some sort of commitment that comes out of some sort of moral or ethical or ideological position. The U.S. is always calculating. And what you said earlier, I think, is also important to emphasize. The military victory is going to be very difficult for them to achieve, partly because of their own military approach. If you look at the actual strategies of the Israeli military and army and the way that they actually carry out war, they've tied their own military practice to the complete destruction of civilian infrastructure and of civilians. That's actually, they have many, you can read documents that this is their approach, because their targets are actually never really militaries. They're always going against occupied people or a civilian population. And when they've said it, it's called the Dahiya Doctrine. It came out in 2006 when they were doing a very similar kind of destroying as much as possible aerial bombardment on Lebanon to defeat Hezbollah, which they failed. They talked about this doctrine that they have called the Dahiya Doctrine, saying that the only way to control someone like Nasrallah is to bomb.
Yeah, Red Scare, I'm inclined to agree with you. I think it's a little optimistic. You can talk about some kind of the shift that's happening right now, the support that they're losing, the panic buttons that are being pressed, but this is what their option is. Like, there's no backup plan here. Yeah, even if they would want to abandon Israel, like what does that mean? What does that look like? Like it's like, I think Will Menaker from Chapo Trapos described it the other day as like a murder-suicide pact. That's kind of what it is. Look, Rob, I know I was wrong about Booby Kennedy, but wait till you get a load of Dr. Shiva. He's the one for sure. I don't know about that. Is that the next person on the horizon? The anti-imperialist hero, Robert Kennedy Jr. If only anyone could have predicted that wouldn't go that well.
All of the civilian society in which Hezbollah is embedded. And if they tie themselves to that, the only way they can achieve victory in Gaza, for example, is to keep on bombing civilians. And it's like a circle, because nobody is supporting it. They are becoming more and more isolated. There's just no way to defend it anymore. It's really not looking good for the Zionists in the near future.
It's interesting what you're saying, that, if you think back to the last
Justin was saying
years,
as well during that talk, though, like it's a really interesting point. Like the way they're not acting like people that are planning on still being around. Like they're acting in a totally like self-defeating, like almost suicidal way, engaging with their neighbors like this and engaging in this kind of depravity.
There was, of course, there was the 2002 Israeli reinvasion of the West Bank, the Jenin massacre. Then in 2006, the Israelis go to war in Lebanon. And basically, even though they dropped a lot of anti-personnel weapons, cluster bombs, killed a lot of people, they didn't win the war. Then there was the Gaza war in 2008. Then there was the Gaza war in 2014. There was the Gaza war in 2021. So Israel is constantly at war, either with Palestinians or with its neighbors. And it routinely bombs Syria, just routinely carries out bombing strikes. So you have a government which is not, like, peace is an interlude, and usually a very short interlude before the next conflict. And so Israel does this thing all the time. And as a consequence, the people in the region know all about how Israel is. That's why the Arab world isn't really friendly. The Arab street isn't friendly, isn't going to be friendly to Israel. Even the normalization process with Saudi Arabia and the others that was trying to be sort of engineered behind the scenes, that can't happen now because there's so much hatred and anger in the street in the Arab world, and generally speaking in the Muslim world. So they can't do that. But as long as the U.S. is attached to that project of endless war, that means the U.S. can't really escape the clutches of its allies. Sometimes your allies can be a bigger problem for you than anything. And I'm saying that, Leanne, because in 2011, President Obama, who I think was conceptualizing a new sort of strategy for the U.S., a new geostrategic strategy, said we have to pivot towards Asia. And a lot of people didn't know what that meant at the time, but pivot to Asia for the U.S. meant let's not stay bogged down in endless war in the Middle East, because that's what Iraq was doing, or Afghanistan and South Asia, or Libya, or Syria. The U.S. was bogged down, and what was happening? China was rising. China was developing economically. It was becoming a bigger and bigger major force. Russia was back on its feet after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So Obama geostrategically saying, let's not be in an endless war in the Middle East, wars we can't actually win. Let's go and confront the bigger problem that we have, the bigger challenge to our empire, which is a rising China. So there was an attempt to kind of escape endless war in the Middle East, but tying the United States to Israel means you're tied
escaping.
to endless war in the Middle East. So you keep being bogged down in the Middle East. You can't really pivot
That's
to
exactly
Asia
what I was talking about,
if
that
you're
new
stuck.
tone on China. That's exactly why. They've been trying to desperately to get away from the Middle East so they could concentrate on China. And it's like now that's not even an option. That's why they're doing these buddy-buddy meetings now with President Xi all of a sudden, after we've been talking about for a few years the relentlessly hostile tone that they've taken. Yeah, and the pivot to Asia doesn't seem to be going well. Every CEO gave Xi a standing ovation yesterday. And all that big summit that just happened was sponsored by all these major corporations. How's that economic decoupling going? And again, it's our guy who was vindicated with that. It's our guy. Deng Xiaoping, vindicated yet again. Has been proven right, but has been absolved by history.
And I'd say Netanyahu is stuck. And Biden was basically, it was a love fest with Netanyahu. He said there will not be a ceasefire. The media said, is there a possibility? No possibility. So Biden is stuck. He owns this now. But the U.S. is bogged down. This is a big geostrategic problem. And big sectors of the ruling class in America know it's a problem. That's why I think we're starting to witness the beginning of this sort of fissure, fracture, cleavage, as evidenced by some of the mainstream media coverage of Netanyahu.
I think it's absolutely on point analysis. Israel has never not been at war. It's the whole identity of the Israeli project. I think when during that time of the pivot to Asia, you saw Netanyahu and the Israeli administration getting frustrated with the United States, really upset. Like, why can't we push more? We need to go destroy Iran. We need to go threaten Iran. There was a push for war with Iran at the time, trying to drag the U.S. into that as well. There's just been no, I think, concept of peace in the Israeli self-definition. It has to have this kind of, we're on the defense, we need to defend ourselves in order to justify its own existence in the region the way it's existing now.
Yeah. So let me just jump in there and say this. Like, when you think about what Netanyahu did with Iran, the Iran nuclear deal, you're absolutely right. He was worried that Obama was going to actually pivot to Asia. What was Obama really doing, everybody? He was signing a peace deal with Iran to end the U.S. conflict with Iran that began with the Iranian Revolution in 1979. The Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah, who had been put on the throne by the CIA in a coup in 1953. He was there for 26 years. A people's revolution overthrew the Shah. And then the U.S. broke all relations with the Iranian government, not because it was a dictatorship, because the U.S. had just supported a dictatorship, but because they were going to be independent. So Obama finally sort of spent almost all of his political capital to get that the nuclear deal with Iran, because he was actually part of the ruling class thinkers who said, time to pivot to Asia, meaning to confront China.
Yeah, Emperor's New Clothes, Bethune, really, literally one of the greatest Canadians. Put him on our money. Don't put fucking King Charles on our money. Put Norman Bethune on our money. Someone who actually embodies the values that we pretend to have. You know, if you haven't read it, Emperor's New Clothes, what Mao and others had to say about him. So I'm sure you've read it, but Mao's eulogy to Bethune is so touching. It's just really incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And Netanyahu freaked out. That's why when he came to the U.S. Congress, he was denouncing Obama. He wanted the Republicans and the naysayers to break up the nuclear deal, because he was afraid if the U.S. pivots to Asia, it's going to mean actually bad things for Israel, meaning Israel will become additionally isolated, or at least unimportant or less important for U.S. imperialism.
Yep, absolutely. The Israeli state is completely dependent on the United States. If the United States looks like looks like it's moving its priorities to another horizon, to another version of endless war, because I don't think we can say that the United States is saying, okay, time to move to a more peaceful way of doing foreign policy. No, they're shifting. They're shifting to a new assessment of what the enemy is for United States imperialism. And they're kind of saying, you know, Israel, your priorities are not necessarily the same priorities that we have. We're not really that invested in the project of Greater Israel that is still not completed, as Netanyahu and the Israeli Settler Society thinks it is. So I think it's really important to watch and track.
Let me just ask you real quick. Part of the issue for the U.S. it's a power. It's the dominant power, but it needs allies.
Yeah.
And you look at what happened with some of the statements from Macron in France, Trudeau yesterday in Canada. The Indonesian head of state was visiting with Biden, and Biden said, well, we had Biden can hardly talk, but he tried to get out the words. We had a good talk about the climate. Prime Minister, what's your comments? And the Prime Minister said, thank you, President Biden. It's time for a ceasefire. The Gaza war can't keep going. The suffering is so terrible.
That was a really cool moment
Thank
as
you
well.
very much. And Biden is just like looking like a deer in front of the headlights. He's completely surprised, completely taken off guard. But this is where it's going. Like, the rest of the world wants it to end. The only reason it's not ending is Netanyahu can't figure out how to end it without losing, and Biden is stuck. He's stuck because of this open, full, complete embrace of Netanyahu. So let's just talk. Yeah. Excuse me. Let's just talk about where the U.S. now stands with its allies.
Yeah, well, the Indonesian Prime Minister's surprise call for a ceasefire on Biden was really great, and we can't deny there were 2 million people on the Indonesian street out on November 4 in support of a ceasefire. So really, the pressure is coming from the bottom and is coming very strongly. And Biden is completely backed into a corner. He's completely, because of his complete embrace of Netanyahu, as you said, he can't respond. There's no way for him to turn that's actually going to help him save face. Undercover, as this whole thing is unfolding, maybe Blinken is starting to change his tune a little bit. He's starting to say that there's too many deaths, too many civilian deaths, but the U.S. is still sending weapons to Israel in larger and larger numbers. They've just approved another $14 billion military aid package to Israel. There's been over 120 planes and many ships and thousands of tons of weapons that have been delivered to Israel in the past couple of weeks. I mean, the United States is still tied very concretely to the Israeli project, and they've been making calls to Netanyahu. They've been trying to tell him to show restraint. They've been trying to see if they can maneuver some way out of this, but it's really not looking like it's possible. In the meantime, the pressure from the streets around the world is really rising. That's extremely significant, and the fact that Macron, one of the biggest allies of France, is one of the biggest allies of not just the U.S., but the U.S. war project. They've always been on board. Macron went out and said, it's time for a ceasefire. We need a ceasefire. We can't have all this civilian deaths anymore. Some sectors of French society, which is a very polarized society, in particular around the question of Islamophobia and terrorism and calling all Arabs and Muslims in France as threats or terrorists. We can see this in the French policies and the ways in which they treat immigrants. There was the sector of society that went out and called Macron a terrorist sympathizer, but much larger sector of society that's been pushing him, just like we were seeing in the United States and in other countries. So Biden is becoming isolated just like Netanyahu is becoming isolated by his allies and also by the people who voted for him. I mean, people don't want to vote for him anymore. His own party.
Well, the Arab American population certainly doesn't.
No.
I mean, when we were at that rally on November 4th, the top official of CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, he got up and said, we're not going to vote for him in Michigan. We're not going to vote for him in Minnesota. Well, the Arab American vote, like in Michigan, there's 200,000 Arab American voters. I mean, Michigan was narrowly won by Biden. Those people are not going to vote for him. Genocide Joe is the sort of common and popular slogan now.
That's not going away.
And a lot of young people you know, when you think about the public perception of young people, not just Arabs, but young people in general, like, they're against what the U.S. is doing. They're against what Biden is doing. They're mortified. I mean, Biden is already a pretty disgusting candidate. I mean, the only reason he won, and nobody voted for Biden in 2020 because they were thinking a year ahead of time, I only wish Joe Biden could become president. No, they were afraid of Donald Trump because Trump is so right-wing. So they voted for Biden because maybe it would be a way of stopping Trump. And Biden narrowly won. Now, after 4 years or 3 years, 13% of the population of voters say that they are better off than they were in 2021 when Biden took office. So very dismal domestic approval ratings. Inflation has really hurt people. And then you have young people and young black people in particular, another important base for the Democratic Party and a really important voter base that, you know, helped Biden succeed against Trump. They're either really angry and opposed to the policy of embrace of genocide.
What's going on here?
Present anything that they have any confidence in. And like you said, it's possible that not everyone is, you know, calling for the end of the occupation yet, where this is a huge shift. It's not going to happen overnight in U.S. public consciousness. But people at least want to see the United States as some sort of neutral observer. And the U.S. has managed to deceive people and kind of pose as that at different moments in history, saying we are, you know, we're neutral, we're helping mediate, we're helping to create peace in the Middle East. This is a phrase that's used a lot. But right now, there's no hiding the complete lack of neutrality of the White House and the complete complicity of the genocide that's happening right now. And I think Biden's made a lot of missteps.
Like Red Scary, like you're saying, the thing about 80% of Democrats wanting a ceasefire is that there's no way for the party to deflect blame onto Republicans or anyone but Biden. That's the amazing thing, is because they're doing that, right? Oh, what do you think the Republican policy on Gaza is going to be? And it's like, I think it's going to be the exact same thing. I think it's going to be 100% identical. Maybe with a little bit less hand-wringing, if you want to really talk about something that's going to be different. Maybe it'll be ever so slightly less like apologetic, but it's not like they've even been apologetic about it. But they've maybe tried to distance themselves ever so slightly from what they're clearly supporting. That's the only difference, is maybe going to be a difference in rhetoric. That is all. You can't make that argument. Well, it sounds like you want the Republicans to be in charge. It's like, well, what will be the difference? Fundamentally, what will be the difference? Like you're in 100% bipartisan agreement about this, so that argument kind of fails to connect with people in that case.
The White House has also made a lot of bad assessments because, like you said, young people, not just Palestinians, not just Arabs, who definitely have very concrete reasons to no longer want to vote for Biden, but young people who went through the pandemic, young people who went through the uprisings after the assassination of George Floyd and were repressed by a lot of the same tactics that the Israeli military, has trained many police forces in the United States in crowd repression tactics. There's actual training programs between the police and the IDF, and young people have experienced that directly. There's no way that they're going to suddenly accept U.S. complicity in the genocide against the Palestinian people. They've made a misstep. They think that they can control the narrative when people have concrete political experiences that are going to change their opinions. It's not just a question of discourse. When you have people who have been suffering from police brutality for decades, and then on top of it, the kind of neglect of the U.S. state during the pandemic that we saw, over 1 million people dead, the economy was totally not protecting the working and the lower classes in any way. People are no longer going to have confidence in the system that is saying right now that Israel is on the defense. It's really a broken strategy, and it's failing in its efficacy.
Yeah, when you think about the death toll in Gaza. Now, we don't really know the death toll. The Gaza Health Ministry is putting out numbers.
As much as Netanyahu is saying like it's lower. We think it's lower than what Hamas is saying. It's actually higher. Because not only, I don't even think the death toll has been updated the last like 2 or 3 days. And there's also hundreds or possibly thousands of people still buried underneath rubble in these neighborhoods. So it's actually higher, as in contrary to what Netanyahu said in that interview. It's higher than what we're thinking it is now, not lower.
Biden sort of callously, cynically, in a most vulgar way said, we don't really know what the death count is because the Ministry of Health is controlled by Hamas. Well, yeah, Hamas was the elected government of Gaza, so yeah, the health ministry. But there's no denying that these people are dead. The only thing is there might be many more dead. Because
and not to mention people who've died of thirst, hunger, and waterborne disease from drinking dirty water. And it's like, this is just getting worse. Like if this doesn't stop, like there's people people in Gaza having a harder time getting food and water. Like this is like, it's literally like a medieval siege. And if it doesn't stop, many more people will die in an even more horrifying manner. It is absolutely depraved. Everything about this is just one of the most depraved things that we've seen.
When you bombing apartment buildings, there's a lot of people in that rubble who we're not going to find their bodies for months. So the numbers that we're thinking about, the numbers that we know are, as of yesterday, I think 11,200 or something like that. And again, I had mentioned that was 1 out of every 200 people. Now that's 0.5%, right? That's 0.5%. If the number goes to 21,000 or 22,000, that would be 1%. So let's just look at these numbers. So because it's hard to what does 1% mean? Well, the American population is 330 million people. So what's 10%? Well, that's 30 million. What's 1%? That's 3 million. What's 0.5%? What's 1 out of 200? That's 1.5 million people. Hey, Americans, if we had in this country 1.5 million people in the United States killed in the last 5 weeks because a foreign country was bombing apartment buildings, bombing hospitals, it wouldn't matter what organizations were destroyed. If you do this to a people, which is genocidal, when you kill, for Americans, the number would be 1.5 million if it was an equivalent number, 1/2 of 1%. Well, what happens to the people who suffered that? They're going to fight. They're not going to think, oh, gee whiz, my family got wiped out. I hope I get over it. No, they're going to want to take up arms. They're going to want to fight. The siblings who lost a brother or a sister in that rubble, what are they going to want to do? They're going to want to fight. You could wipe Hamas off the face of the map. I don't think they can, but let's say you did. What about all those people? What about that huge part of the population that just lost somebody because an apartheid regime decided to destroy their apartment building? Those people are going to fight, and they're going to fight and fight and fight. They're not going to stop fighting. Killing this number of people is not a winning strategy. And the only way it would win is if you want to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza, which some of the Israeli military says they're perfectly happy to do. Or yesterday in that disgusting pro-war demonstration in Washington where people were like, yeah, let's flatten Gaza. Those are genocidal thoughts, right? To flatten Gaza. Yeah, maybe if you kill 2 million people, wipe them all out, kill every one of them, maybe you win then. But the Israelis can't do that. Even right now, with as terrible as this is, the world is rising up. The world's going to rise up this Friday on November 17th. And it's going to keep going. So the Israelis can't do that. They can't have 100% genocide. So the idea that there's a military solution for Israel, that's a fantasy. The idea that the United States government and Biden administration...
We all remember the decades prior to Hamas ever existing was a very peaceful time for Palestinians as well, right? You can look at commentary from before Hamas existed, and it's all the exact same justification about terrorism and the the teachers and the terrorists are hiding in the hospitals. It's the same thing that they've been saying for decades and decades and decades, long before Hamas ever existed. And if they just quit tomorrow and every single Hamas member, surrendered tomorrow and all the hostages were released, it would still, the exact same thing would just continue. The exact same violence on the part of Israel, the exact same justifications. Yeah, just the newest face on the dehumanization campaign, exactly. And if they're gone one day, it's going to be someone else, and then it's going to be someone else. It'll still be the exact same violence and the exact same justification for it.
Is asking American taxpayers to fund genocide because ultimately it will win. People are, one, they're going to be morally repulsed, and two, nobody believes that. Anybody who has a brain is going to think those people in Gaza, the next generations are going to keep fighting until occupation ends.
Absolutely. I mean, and the numbers are, if anything, lower, like you said, lower than what they actually are. And that doesn't count the number of people who've been very seriously wounded and the millions who have nowhere to live anymore because of the complete destruction of residential areas. There's images now, and we're hearing about families who are putting different color strings on their children and on themselves, on their wrists, so that if a bombing does happen, they can recognize the body parts. And children are living in this. And this actually nothing new. Children have been, there's no child in Gaza who hasn't experienced a bombing. There's been bombs, I can't even count the number of times. It's not just the every 2 years, the official wars.
Yeah, without access
constant.
to medical care, wounds and diseases can be death
sentences.
sentences.
You can't actually
And
think
when you
that
shut
this is
down
what
all the
you can subject
hospitals,
a society to, and then suddenly they're going to just accept
depraved.
That, maybe
just depraved.
they eradicate Hamas and install a new regime. There's been talk about bringing in a third party, an international force to govern Gaza. I mean, so what? It's not going to stop the Palestinian resistance. It's not just Hamas that's fighting either. It's all sectors of society. And if you look at history, there's been no moment where even just the complete asymmetrical.
Look at the images on the screen right now. It's not.
The United
It's
States
the
has done it
Nakba.
in Vietnam. They failed. They did
It's
it
the exact same
across
situation.
the Middle East. They failed. It doesn't matter how much stronger, how much exponentially more powerful the military might is when you're going against people who have a real reason to be fighting, who are under occupation, who are part of a liberation struggle. It's not that simple. People expected Israel to go into Gaza and come out. It sounds simple. Come in with U.S. military equipment.
We love you, Loden.
Best, most advanced military equipment in the world, and eradicate a military force that's operating with homemade weapons, homemade equipment, operating under tunnels that supposedly Israel says they've already destroyed in the previous bombardments that they've done. And it turns out that actually they can't. The will of the people is much stronger. And the accumulated experience of the Palestinian resistance is actually very, very significant. They really have a strategy that is keeping the Israeli offensive at bay and is causing a lot of Israeli losses, although they're not really reporting this in the U.S. and Israeli media as much as perhaps the reality is.
Yeah, the Palestinian people, their ability to keep fighting, even though they've been made refugees for 75 years, is the actual element that retains national identity. You know, when you think about a people or a nation, however one wants to describe it, it's usually associated with the land. It's our land, it's the land, it's where our ancestors lived, it's where our homes are. So consciousness and culture shapes around land. But now you've had for 75 years one dispossession after another, where sector after sector after sector of the Palestinian people are driven into refugee status. So there's refugee camps all over the place. And millions of Palestinians, have been made refugees, and millions of Palestinians still identify as Palestine. They still say, we want the right to return from the homes and villages from which we've been expelled. And so this concept of nationhood or peoplehood is retained even with the loss of land. Even in Gaza, the people are refugees from earlier expulsions, all of them. So you have a situation where over 75 years, the Palestinian people have, through their steadfastness, their resilience, even with the diaspora, with spreading around, the people being expelled, they keep fighting. And as long as they keep fighting, Palestine lives. It's actually the struggle that makes Palestine live, not simply the land at this point. It's this ongoing, enduring struggle. And then you have Lebanon, you have Iraq, you have Syria, you have, of course, Egypt, which formed a strategic partnership with the Israelis in 1979 with the signing of the Camp David agreement, which took the largest Arab army out of the conflict, which allowed Israel then to invade Lebanon in 1982 and do the rest. But still, there's the Egyptian people. Aside from the governments, the masses of people, they are inspired by the Palestinians. They feel this struggle. So at a certain point, if this does not resolve and resolve sometime soon...
Demi Dorko, I mean, it's just one
ceasefire-
thing that I really believe, and that this is, I feel like, has confirmed, which is just that you can't, there's no modern military equipment that can do that when you have a situation when it's like an army of colonizers and occupiers fighting people, even if they have nothing, that are defending their land and their homes. You just can't, it can't be done. And it doesn't mean that it's easy or that these struggles are quick, you know, like as we saw with Vietnam, it was decades. It was it was between 65 and 75, and it was 20 years prior to that fighting the French. Like, it's years and years, and it's the like unbelievable amounts of sacrifice and collective punishment and brutality and misery and pain that gets inflicted by the colonizers in this situation. But if you have a determined people that refuse to give up, that refuse to allow the colonizers to complete their project, then you can't defeat it.
The likelihood is that there's going to be growing pressure on the governments of those neighboring countries to join the fray.
The courage to place an IED on a tank. Yeah, and a tank that doesn't have infantry support because your army is fucking scared. And all they're good at is dropping bombs on little kids from afar. Right? That's exact example of precisely why. It's impossible to defeat this kind of an army, a guerrilla army.
Come in. And right now, you can see by the statements of the Hezbollah leadership and some of the Iranian leadership.
Because they're not defending, as much as they tell themselves that they're defending their homeland, they're not. They're not. They're colonizers and occupiers from fucking Minnesota and Brooklyn and Pittsburgh and wherever else, you know? Calgary or wherever else, you know? They're not defending their homeland. They might have convinced themselves that they are, but they're really not. And deep down, they know that. And that's why they'll never be as desperate or as determined. Because they don't actually belong there, as much as they've convinced themselves that they do.
Refrain from having a regional war because they think it will be actually used or manipulated by the U.S. and Israel to sort of change the subject from the Israeli genocide against the people of Gaza. But it also means they probably are feeling the Israelis are not going to succeed in Gaza. And if they were about to succeed, then I think the probability of regional war would become quite real. Anyway, as we move towards the finish here, I want to get your assessment, because you pay careful attention to the region, to Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and of course, watching events from a distance with Iran. I want to get your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was really important to see Nasrallah's speech. Now it's a little over a week ago.
And he's the leader of Hezbollah.
The leader of Hezbollah. A lot of people had a lot of speculation about what he was going to say. Because of the mood in the region, the fact that the Palestinian cause is so unifying for the Arab and North African people across the region, it's something that, despite what the governments claim or do the small inches that have been made towards normalization with Israel, the masses of people are firmly in support of the Palestinian cause, and they have been throughout history. It's been something that has not only been part of the Palestinian national identity, but perhaps also the Arab identity, to identify with the Palestinian liberation struggle. It is, in a sense, almost that kind of anchoring, the anchoring feeling, the anchoring sentiment that creates unity in the region, despite the government maneuvers and shifting. A lot of people thought, okay, all the regional governments are going to just come right in and join the fray because of that kind of pressure. And we see that actually Nasrallah was a little bit more strategic about that. I think you're right that what his assessment is if a regional war breaks out unnecessarily, it's going to be an opening for the United States, which still has the greatest military power, which still has many bases across the region, to try to reassert control in certain areas. And so but it's also very true that forces across the region are watching very carefully. There's been a lot of exchange of fire on the border with Lebanon, the northern front, that's causing issues for Israel. It's keeping it occupied in two different places.
And a lot of the Israelis who live in that area have been moved out.
Absolutely.
There's a big population shift going on.
Mm-hmm. They've been evacuated from the territories that they took illegally already. The border with Lebanon has been contested. There's parts of Lebanon that are under Israeli occupation on and off, and until now, parts of the southern farming land are under Israeli occupation. So there's been activity on that front, which is complicating things for Israel, that's keeping it occupied at the northern border, not allowing it to put all of its efforts on the invasion of Gaza. And Yemen has also threatened Israel by showing that it has the capability to send missiles from Yemen all the way to Tel Aviv, and has said that they're willing to do that if things continue the way they're continuing. So all eyes are on Gaza. I think what Nasrallah said, he said all options are on the table. It seems that Israel and the United States are taking that very seriously, because after his speech, they did escalate in many different ways. And the U.S. is sending more weapons. There's been more attempts to control the narrative. So things are really kind of, every moment, the correlation of forces shifts. The situation is really, really dynamic. But Israel has lost before to Hezbollah, and they will likely lose in this. It's looking more and more like they will lose in Gaza. They will not achieve the victory as they have defined it. They are only able to massacre civilians, like we've been saying throughout the show. They're not able to actually defeat military targets as they've defined them. And they lost in Lebanon in 2006. So there's really not much opening for them right now. They're either going to have to redefine what victory means for them. They're going to have to try to mediate some sort of solution, or they're going to lose. And what happens after that is something that we should really think about. The Palestinian cause is not just in name; it's not symbolic. People are actually fighting. People want to see the end of the occupation, and this is a shift in history right now. For a long time, it felt like Israel had all of the power. It was very difficult to actually make advances to it.
Will we see the end of the Zionist entity?
Struggle against the Israeli occupation that has made advances.
I like to believe that we will.
And so things could look different in a couple of weeks. There could be the question of the Palestinian state is back on the table in a much more real way than it has been in the past decade.
Yeah, good. Every war has a beginning, and with the exception perhaps of Korea, every war has an end, and this war will end. And the question is, how will it end? Will Hamas be defeated and Netanyahu and the Israelis claim victory, and they drive the people of Gaza out of Gaza, and they put it completely under Israeli control, and then what? There's going to be some prolonged peace? It doesn't seem like a possibility to me. That's one option, though. Let's talk about that as one option. The second option is that the Israelis are compelled to have a ceasefire. They haven't destroyed Hamas. Hamas is actually in a stronger position in spite of the tremendous loss of life and suffering and infrastructure loss, because the Israelis won't have succeeded. Internally in Israel, The longer the war goes, the pressure is going to become greater and greater. A large part of the Israeli population feels Netanyahu should not be the leader of the country. They blame Netanyahu for the failure to protect the population on October 7th and the sort of heavy-handed reaction immediately afterwards, which I think resulted in killing a lot of Israeli citizens. People, we're hearing reports of many large numbers of people leaving Israel. As a settler regime that started as basically a European project, but now has refugees or immigrants or people who have moved there from many parts of the world, including from Brooklyn, from the United States. If it's no longer a privileged apartheid state, people can leave. The whole momentum, when you look at the trajectory, I think Israel loses. We're not predictive. We don't have a crystal ball. But I don't see how they win. And if they don't win under these circumstances, then the issue of Palestinian statehood becomes primary after it's been negated for so many decades by the Israeli occupation. So we don't know exactly what form this takes, but the war will end. It needs to end sooner than later to save the lives of all of these poor, innocent civilians, half of whom, or more than half, are children. Anyway, just your last thoughts as we close out. How the war ends, what's the future look like? I said on a show a couple of weeks ago with Miko Peled, who is, a son of an Israeli general. I said, how does it end? And he said there's two ways, two paths. Democracy, where everybody lives as equals, or apartheid, meaning the continued existence of the apartheid supremacist occupation regime. Two options. Anyway, what are your thoughts?
Well, first, I agree that we can't predict. We can't know for sure. But I think what is absolutely true is we already knew this, but now more and more people are knowing it because the situation itself is just proving it, that Israeli apartheid, Israeli occupation is not an inevitability. It's not invulnerable. It's not something that will exist forever. It's not something that existed for very long to begin with. And neither is the U.S. domination of the Arab and North African region. We're seeing everything crack at the seams now, and we're seeing, like you've so well said, that Israel has two options. It can either continue bombing civilians in the massive numbers and killing civilians in the massive numbers that it has been doing, and lose and become more and more isolated on the world stage, and possibly lose their number one, the only reason why they exist today is because of US backing. Or they are going to have to come up with some sort of solution that would change the political situation dramatically and would no longer make it so that it's simply such a small negotiation around perhaps, how much authority they're giving to the Palestinian Authority to manage the occupied territories or not. The question of statehood will be back on the table. The question of the occupation will be back on the table. It will really remove many of the gains that the Israeli settler project has achieved over the past couple of years. There's 700,000 settlers now in the occupied territories that will have to be dealt with, even if it's just a question of Israeli presence in the occupied territories themselves. There's going to be a lot of civil conflict within Israeli society. There is right now, like you said. People are tired of constantly fighting. People don't want to keep doing this. In fact, many people, like you said, are leaving Israel. It's interesting because one of the ways in which Israel got the population there in the first place was promising this kind of Western way of life that is premised on economic well-being and not active war. And less is that looking like the reality for Israelis. And so they're going to go back to Brooklyn. They're going to go back to Europe, those that can. There's also a lot of people that were brought over from African countries and other countries across the third world who have less options. But the whole premise of Israeli society and the Israeli project is cracking at this moment. So, the way it's going to end, we'll have to see. But whatever does happen, there's no going back now. The not only has public opinion shifted around the question of Israeli occupation of Palestine, but the actual way in which Palestine is being dealt with at all levels, policy, geopolitical, social, media, has completely shifted and is going to change the way in which the region is understood, the way in which the United States engages with the region, and the negotiating power of the Palestinian people going forward. As much as there has been so much devastation, and it's almost impossible to describe what it means to actually look at your own people being massacred in this kind of numbers. And it's not just for Palestinians. People just seeing the imagery, it makes them think of their own children. It makes them think, what would it be like?
Who's going to
have
this rally and saying no
every
ceasefire?
night, please
What
wear
kind of
this
a human
bracelet so
being
that I can
does that?
recognize
Honestly, it's
your
sickening.
body parts, perhaps after the bomb falls on our house. It's completely you can't understand it. But at the same time as there is this huge feeling of devastation, of the massive loss of life, the optimism for the future of the Palestinian struggle has never been stronger. People are seeing that the Palestinian resistance actually has made achievements. There's a change in the calculus of power, and it's not inevitable that it continues forever. It's going to be called into question, and what happens next we'll have to see. But for sure, people are going to continue mobilizing on the ground. In the United States, for sure, November 17 is going to be huge. The pressure on the US government's funding of the Israeli project is only going to increase. And the more that there is this pressure from the bottom and from all sides, I think the more that we're going to see the favor being shifted for liberation, for an end to apartheid, and for an end to the genocidal project of occupation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the situation has changed. I want to hold this up for people so that they can see it for themselves. That's Friday, November 17th. It's called Shutdown. People are going to be marching. They're going to be going on student strikes. The students in occupied Palestine have called for all the students of the region and the people of the world to do the same. There's going to be, I know shops are closing here in New York City, Arab-owned shops. It's going to be something unlike anything that's ever happened before. And I just want to invite all of the people listening or watching the show, join that movement, become part of it, help make history, help free Palestine. Leanne, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. We'll see you on the streets.
Thank you.
Great stuff as usual from Brian Becker. I just wanted to show this clip. Jordan just tweeted this. It's a clip from Al Jazeera. This is from I believe it's from the Al Shifa hospital.
Nowhere is safe in Gaza, and there is no place to go.
Where on earth are the Arab leaders? Where are the Muslims? Do any of you accept this to happen to your own child? Where is the humanity? Israeli snipers are targeting young children. Is this child a militant? Our blood is not only on the hands of the Israelis, but also on those Arab leaders standing and watching in silence.
A few pieces of stale leftover bread is all that's available at the Indonesian hospital. It's already being called one of the world's worst man-made humanitarian disasters. But the sounds coming out of Gaza are very different, depending on which side of the bombing posts it on social media.
Sick
Nowhere
people.
is safe in Gaza, and there is no...
They're fucking doing raves. They're doing raves on the mass graves that they're creating. I mean, if there's any better summation of like what Israel is, it's that. It's these IDF murderers carrying out, having raves on tops of on top of the rubble and the piles of corpses that they've created. You know, it's horrifying. But that's the question, you know, things are changing very rapidly. Fortnite dancing on mass graves is really show us what Nazi Germany would have been putting out if it existed now. Absolutely. I mean, the idea that it's somehow controversial to make that kind of connection. People have been showing up to these rallies with signs that equate the Israeli flag with the Nazi flag, and people are saying, "Oh, they're having swastikas. They're Nazis themselves." It's a absolutely apt comparison. You know, it should not be controversial to point that out. As much as Israel tries to claim that Hamas, they're like the new Nazis. This is like it's the worst attack since the Holocaust. They're the ones that are acting like Nazis right now. And that's not an exaggeration. It's not hyperbole, and it definitely shouldn't be controversial to point that out. The new Nazis, but even worse. Yeah, these people that have nothing. The people that were bombing and keeping them in a concentration camp are worse than Nazis. You know, it's just sick. It's absolutely sick. I have to get going, I think, folks. Like I said, it's been a long day. It was a long night last night. I'm tired. It's like it's almost pitch black right now. It's 4 p.m. Like, I don't even think the sun has come out today. It's just been so dark this entire time. Just a miserable day. And yeah, I've been very tired all day. It was a great stream, though. Honestly, I haven't been very high energy, but it was a fantastic conversation with Justin Potter and John Elmer. And I've had another fantastic day breaking this stuff down with each and every one of you. We are just 12 subs away from the goal. As you know, the only way I'm able to do this show every day is through the support of the community members.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Wonderful community members such as Comrade Bushy, who always comes through and supports the channel. I appreciate it a lot, Comrade Bushy. Thank you for that. Very, very, very kind of you. Thank you for the 5 gifted subs.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Risk Inverse, as well, for the gifted sub. Thanks, Risk Inverse. Very much appreciated. It's the only way that I'm able to continue doing this show each and every day is through the generosity of the community members. And, you know, it means a lot to me, as I always try to remind everyone, it means a lot to me that there's a community out there that support this show, supports the work that I do on here. You know, it's not something I take lightly, and I've been trying to, whatever platform I have, I've been trying to use that to at least contribute something positive to all this, you know, at least try and do whatever we can to counter the relentless narrative that we're subjected to from our kind of corporate owned media and our political class. So a mere 6 subs away from the goal. A mere 6 subs to go.
You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you for the gifted sub, Loading. That's really nice of you. Thanks for everything you do, Loading. It's weird, like, definitely when this started, I was having, like, real emotional reactions to some of the horrifying footage, and I don't want to say I'm desensitized to it. You know, I'm not desensitized to it. I've seen some of the most horrific images, especially of kids being in various states of having horrible violence committed against them, and I'm not desensitized to it, but I don't know. I think one thing is I stopped feeling like trying to center my own feelings in it, and I've just I think it makes me more angry than anything. You know, I think there was a time earlier on when this really started that it was really emotionally affecting me a lot. I don't want to say that it's not, but I think it's more just like hardening my resolve to never waver or to never kind of give up on this fight. They do come in a lot of forms. Oh. Anyway, a mere 5 subs to get to the goal, chat. So one final plea. If there's any brave heroes out there that want to support this show and support the work that I do on here, every little bit helps. Oh, I'm glad to hear the charges against Wesam Cooley were dropped. That's obviously good. That's obviously good news. You know, all this effort is just it's a way to try, even whether the charges get dropped or not, it's a way to silence people, right? It's about trying to make an example of people, trying to scare other people out of speaking out, and it's not working.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
Try to have a good weekend rub.
It's not working, you know? People are not being intimidated. They're trying everything that they can to scare people out of speaking out, and it's not happening. It's not working. Bleep Lord, thank you for the 500 bits. Thank you for that. You know, we can't let ourselves be intimidated. I know a lot of people have been trying to intimidate me.
Rob to talk you through all this.
A lot of people have been trying to intimidate me, and it's not going to work. This shit's not going to work this time. What can I say? Ragdijin, thank you very much for the gifted sub. I really appreciate that. The support today. Thanks. We got 4 left, folks. We got a mere, minor, measly 4 subs to go. Are there 4 friendship triangle soldiers? They're gonna drag my tired ass across the finish line.
You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Irate Lump, thanks for 35 months, tier 1. 35 months,
You can count on me.
So
You're gonna
close.
have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
So close to the very exclusive 3-year Pearl sub badge. And thank you, Ground Level News, as well for 7 months, tier 1. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Couldn't be here for the stream, but I hope it was good.
Greasy Groob 69, thanks for 6 months of Prime. I will make sure to highlight the conversation that I had earlier with Justin Potter and John Elmer to share that, because that was really fantastic.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Saint Lotus, thanks for the gifted sub. Very first gifted sub on the channel.
You're gonna have good old Rob to
from
talk
Saint
you through all
Lotus
this.
97.
TRRS Maduro, I'm always lurking even when I can't.
And thank you, Take Quiero as well. 15 months, tier 1. Thank you very much, Take Quiero. We did it. Man. You know, some time ago, I made a certain promise about sub numbers and about certain things that would happen when certain benchmarks were reached. And I'm not counting on it as staying at this level. However, I wouldn't be being honest with you, the community, the chat, if I didn't tell you that a certain figure with that last sub a certain figure was reached just now. And it's not going to stay at that level, but it was never a question of staying at a certain level, was it? Anyway, while some of the things that we're seeing are ongoing, I'm not going to be engaging in any weird stuff. I think that would make me feel a little weird, and it would probably make all of us feel a little weird. But I guess I'm not thrilled about this, to be quite honest. In fact, I made this promise to the community without ever really thinking that it would ever happen. But I guess this represents an IOU to the chat, to the community, that I will, I guess, at some point. You sound like a White House spokesperson, I know. I guess at some point I will do some kind of a bathtub stream situation. I don't know when that's going to be. Okay, it's not, I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to be any time like in the next week or so. But a promise is a promise. I'm a man of my word. Jesus. No, it's absolutely not appropriate to anything that is going on right now. I could not agree more. And this is not any time that's going to be happening anytime soon. To be totally clear. It's not quite tub time at the moment. No, it's not. It's not even close to being that. It's not even close. Okay, I gotta go. I'm very tired, and I gotta go pick up my kid. I was late picking him up yesterday, and he was not happy about it, and I felt really bad. And it's pitch black. We're gonna have a nice night eating pizza. He's really excited to watch the new Scott Pilgrim show. I'm gonna go ahead and raid Hassan again. He's been doing fantastic coverage of this, so I think it's not like he needs my help or anything, but I genuinely think he's been doing really great coverage of this. So the Rob Russet raid, exactly. The Scott Pilgrim show desperately needs more Wallace Wells, otherwise it's really good. Oh, you watched it, Diego? That's cool. Pick out some swim trunks. Oh, I got trunks. I'll have to check out the VOD. I missed the interview today. I'll make sure to highlight it. It was really great. It was really great, so I encourage people to check that. Anyway, thanks friends. Thanks for tuning in today. Thanks for supporting me in the stream and the community. It means a lot. It really does. I'll be back on Monday. I'll be back on Monday. See you folks in the Discord. Goodbye.